World Affairs Councils of America. This is an organization, our headquarters are in Washington, D.C., and we'll be going for the national conference in November, when we'll be all doing all kinds of interesting things and going places in D.C. to learn and to delve a little bit more into U.S. foreign policy, all kinds of issues related to foreign affairs. But our organization here was founded in 2010, and our mission is both local and global. Each World Affairs Council operates as an independent organization connected to the network through our national office. And our job, as we see it, is to help engage and inform our communities in better understanding the world. But the world is also our own backyard, right? We are also a part of the world. And not only do we inform, but we try to make the world better. We have several mentoring programs. We have a summer internship program for high school and college students. We just finished it. They did an International Young Leaders Conference and Career Fair. We have artists come in, and on MLK Day, we will have a poetry and storytelling festival. And we also do forums. We're collaborating with Highmark to do one on the crisis in mental health, especially looking at the crisis among immigrant communities. So check out our website. I'm not going to go in a whole lot more to this, but this is going to be a very interesting day. We're going to start with international, what we're facing in the world, and we're going to end with local, including celebrating local peacemakers, people in our own communities that are having an impact. And you will see their names, we'll bring that out, but before we even get started, I see one of our former peacemakers from about 2018 or so here, Besat Zandia. Besat, would you stand up and just let us acknowledge you? But we will also be honoring others at the end of our program today. So with that, we have a great debt to this wonderful college, Elizabethtown College, and to our board member, Jesse Waters, who is the director of the Bowers Writers House. So I'm going to turn it over to him now. You thought that was a welcome. He's got an even better welcome for you. Come on, Jesse. Thank you. Let's welcome him.
You can't do a better welcome than Joyce Davis. It's just impossible. So I'm Jesse Waters. I direct the Bowers Writers House here on campus, an interdisciplinary venue for presentation, performance, expression, and study. But as well as sitting on the board of the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg, I'm also the director of community impact for the college. So I develop relationships that have to do with resource exchange and in-kind relationships with a lot of different organizations. And we really value being a sustaining institution for the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg. This morning I happened to be watching Smerconish, which I don't often do for many different reasons, which I'm happy to discuss over lunch. But I did happen to notice a headline that read, "The U.S. shrugs as World War III approaches." And I thought, I don't know if I could have been exposed to a more apt headline before this particular event that we have. What does peace look like? What does peace feel like? It's an abstract noun, and I hope that all of us recognize that it's an event such as this that we try to exploit in order to bring that noun from a sense of abstraction into tangibility, into a sense of on-ground practice, on-ground experience. And what I hope for all of us is that we take from our experiences today both a sense of personal and public peace. What is it that we can do collectively within our own communities that can encourage peace to move forward? But when we're at home and we feel that sense of brimming over with emotion as we see the things going on in our micro world and our macro world around us, that we can do as individuals to move peace forward. Because I think often, don't we sometimes feel powerless as individuals when we see so much anti-peace that's going on in the world? Well, again, I very much hope that today's experience empowers and enables all of us to think, both collectively and individually, who are we in this world as peace-seeking individuals? And from having been involved with many peace symposiums, I know that we do have the opportunity to take those things away. So what I'd like to do now is to very briefly invite my colleague, Dr. Sanjay Paul from our International School of Business to come up and make a special introduction.
Thank you, Jesse. So I'm delighted to introduce the introducer for the opening keynote panel. So my role is very limited, but I just want to mention why we are doing this. So we have a group of visiting from Constance University in Germany with us right now. The two faculty colleagues of mine, Katrin Hammaker and Viola Schaefer, are leading this group of 16 students, many of whom are clustered in that corner over there. But so we had a program for them yesterday where we visited the Amish businesses in the morning, had lunch at an Amish family home, and then we had an alumni panel where a couple of our alumni came and spoke to the Constance group and our E-Town hosts. So these Constance students are staying with E-Town students for the last couple of days, and who knows what might come out of this. Usually good things come out of it. So in any case, let me turn it over now to Lily Schneider, a major in environmental engineering, to come and do the real introduction of the opening keynote speaker. Lily.
I'm introducing Colonel Chase Metcalf. He is an active duty Army strategist, assigned as a faculty instructor and the director campaign planning in the Department of Military Strategy, Planning and Operation in the U.S. Army War College. Colonel Metcalf was a UCSA WC Fellow at Yale University for the class of 2020 and holds a Master of International Public Policy from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, a MA in National Security Studies from American Military University, and a BA in Political Science and History from University of Vermont. Colonel Metcalf enlisted in the Army in 1995 as an armored crewman and received his commission from the University of Missouri when he earned a bachelor's degree in communications theory. He also earned a master's degree in international relations from the University of Oklahoma and has received many awards and decorations, including the Bronze Star Medal, Meritorious Service Medal, and Joint Service Commendation Medal. He also earned the Expert Field Medical Badge and an Air Assault Badge. Colonel Metcalf was part of the team that met with our interns this summer when they toured the new states of the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle. Thank you. So we welcome Colonel Metcalf, who will speak about the dangers in our world today and how we might avoid them. Thank you.
Thank you for that generous introduction. Way too generous. So, as mentioned, I'm an Army strategist, active duty Army officer, an assistant professor at the U.S. Army War College. I've been there for a year. And we are there to prepare the next generation of strategic leaders to operate in the strategic or the complex strategic environment in which we face today. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But at its core, our mission remains, as Secretary of War Eli Root mentioned in 1903 when he set the cornerstone for the U.S. Army War College, is not to promote war, but to preserve peace. And to preserve peace, we must be ready for war, because our adversaries are who we need to deter, and I'm going to talk about some of the adversaries that are out there and what they're doing today. The three things I plan to talk about today include the global security environment, sort of outline some of those challenges and threats we face, the growing conversation among national security professionals and experts comparing today to the 1930s, which is a little disconcerting, and then our readiness for the type of war that we would face if we got into a conflict with Russia or China, which would tend to be protracted and costly. And ultimately, we want to avoid those wars. And as I said at the beginning, to avoid them, we need to be prepared for them. So I am obligated to say, as an active duty military officer, that the views I represent today are my views and my views alone. They do not represent the United States Army War College, the U.S. Army, or the Department of Defense. They are my views alone. So just make an obligatory statement to begin with. So as we look around the world today, the U.S. National Security Strategy, published under the Biden administration, characterizes today's world as a decisive decade in which we face a growing competition between autocracies and democracies for the future of the international order. The international order which has benefited the United States since 1945 and the community of democracies like us. The more recent Commission on National Defense Strategy, a bipartisan commission required by Congress, has noted that the environment we face today is one of the most complex and challenging environments that we've faced since World War II. And what you see on the screen is some of those flashpoints and challenges that we face. In the upper left is a picture from the Ukraine-Russian war that's going on right now. The unprovoked aggression from Russia, when they expanded what had been their takeover of Crimea into the larger Ukrainian nation, continues to be the largest land war in Europe since World War II, and the most recent estimates are that there's been 1 million casualties in this war, combined between Ukraine and Russia. The majority of them on the Russian side, but the Ukrainians too are suffering severely. Both sides are waging what we call in the military strategic strike campaigns, targeting deep into both sides' countries, targeting the infrastructure and the ability to sustain the war, which has significant impacts on civilians in both countries. The World Bank has estimated that it's going to cost today $486 billion to reconstruct Ukraine alone. And the war the toll continues to mount. The infrastructure targeting by Russia continues to create future demands for that. Where's that money going to come from? That is a question. And importantly, to keep in mind, because most people don't sit around reading Russian national security documents, the Russian national security strategy and foreign policy concept, think the equivalent of the U.S. national security strategy, written before this war started, puts them in conflict with the West. They believe the West is in conflict with them, and this war is occurring against that backdrop. They see themselves engaged in a civilizational struggle with the West. The point is, regardless of the outcome in Ukraine, it is unlikely to change. Russia's antagonism towards the West and the conflicting interests that we have is unlikely to change. So this will remain a problem for a long time. We then have in the center, upper center, a picture of everybody's favorite thing these days, drones. This is intended to represent the way technology is accelerating the pace and scale of warfare. We have seen a dramatic increase in the use of drones in the Russian-Ukraine war. We have seen Ukraine is using 10,000 drones per month. That's more drones than we had in the U.S. military inventory at the beginning of the war. And it continues to increase. Ukraine claims that they will produce 2 million drones in this year alone for this conflict. Now, most of those are small, commercial off-the-shelf, the type you might use in your backyard. And they've jerry-rigged them to drop munitions on the other side, just like the Russians have done the same thing. But they extend up to large drones. Those are less used because of air defense systems. But the point is, drones are widely used. And we've even heard reports, media reporting, both sides reporting, to have increasingly used AI to enable these drones in order to overcome the electromagnetic interference. Think the other side's attempts to jam drones. Both sides are now using AI or machine learning to enable the drones to do pattern recognition and make decisions about targeting on their own without a human necessarily in the loop. So send the drone out on a mission, it recognizes what it needs to kill, and it goes and kills it. We're seeing that at scale in the Ukraine conflict. And we've seen some other autonomous ground systems starting to be used at very small scale, but we're starting to see things that we haven't used at scale before in this conflict. The point is, war drives technological change in ways that can get out of control. So it's something to think about. The Upper right, you see Israel. So turning to the Middle East, obviously in the news the last couple of days. We have Israel and Hamas since October in a very brutal conflict. We have Israel and Hezbollah fighting, exchanging fire across the Lebanese border. We saw Hezbollah targeted in the last 2 days in a unique and new way. I don't think Israel's claimed credit for it yet, but that is leading national security commenters to speculate about what's going to happen next. And then you see Iran and Israel occasionally exchanging fire and constantly exchanging threats tied to these conflicts, because both Hamas and Hezbollah have ties to Iran. So we see the potential for this region to explode into a much wider conflict beyond just the Israel-Hamas conflict. We also have the Houthis in the lower right-hand corner, another Iranian proxy force operating in Yemen, who has shot ballistic missiles at Israel, just a couple. But more importantly, they have increasingly targeted shipping transiting the Red Sea. This is an area where 12% of global shipping prior to the October 2024 conflicts, or 23 conflict starting, 12% of global shipping transited this area. Well, that drives up insurance rates. Shipping companies are reluctant to use that area because they have conducted 150 plus attacks on shipping, which increases the cost to everybody, as ships have to go around, they no longer transit that area, or they have to pay significantly higher insurance rates to get through there. So it has an impact on all of us at the local level, in the where you're shopping. Then, moving to the bottom center, you have North Korea. North Korea, perennial problem, routinely causes crises to force the world to react to one of the most isolated nations in the world, armed with 30 plus nuclear weapons and seeking to expand that. Threatening Japan, South Korea, U.S. treaty allies who we'd be obligated to come to the defense of, as well as threatening the U.S., or attempting to threaten the U.S. with those nuclear weapons. A constant problem and thorn in the side of the United States over the years, and committed to expanding that nuclear weapons program. They see it as their guarantee against aggression from the South, in their opinion. And then you have in the lower left a picture of a Chinese Coast Guard vessel. This is probably the most important area of concern today for us. You have China, who, after what they term a century of humiliation, is seeking to restore what it believes is its rightful place in the international order, a more dominant place in the international order, chafing against what they perceive as Western domination and humiliation dating back 2 centuries. You see them acting very aggressively based on the military buildup they've done. Preparing for this, I looked it up. The Chinese have experienced 8.1% real growth in their defense budget between 2020 and 2021. So that's above and beyond inflation, compared to the U.S. growth of 4% over that same period of time. So they're eroding what has been a traditional advantage for the U.S. in the region in terms of our military capabilities. The Chinese report spending $200 billion a year on defense. There's a bunch of stuff masked in there. Some people claim they're spending as much as $700 billion on defense, which would be largely equivalent, almost equivalent to what we spend. But China is largely focused in the Indo-Pacific region alone, whereas the U.S. is focused globally. So the comparison is not an apples to apples, dollar for dollar measure. Based on that military buildup, China's been acting very aggressively. They've been doing the island building in the South China Sea. They've been militarizing the South China Sea. If you've ever heard of the 9-Line, it's territorial claims throughout the South China Sea that an international court has rejected, and the Chinese have largely ignored that rejection and said they don't care. The reason this matters to us is because we both have the Philippines and the Japanese, who are treaty allies, again, we're obligated to come to the defense of in that area. Also, China has 500 nuclear weapons today, but they plan to have 1,000 nuclear weapons by 2030. So they're going to double the number of nuclear weapons they have in the next 6 years. The reason that's important is because in the Cold War, it was relatively simple. There was the US and the Soviet Union. So strategic stability talks, it was 2 people talking to each other. Now you have a third party. So now we have a 3-way talks having to go on in the future if we're going to limit the expansion of strategic weapons against nuclear weapons, which is probably not in the best interest of anybody in the world, having more nuclear weapons out there. So again, a potential growing flashpoint. And we'll come back to the nukes as we get to the end of this about how those might be used. Then you have probably the most important flashpoint in the Indo-Pacific, which is Taiwan. All right, Taiwan's been independent from China since the Chinese Civil War in the 1950s or 1940s. Beijing has labeled it a core national interest, think something they are willing to go to war for, and said that if Taiwan moves towards independence, they will act. Well, in 1996, they did conduct military exercises to pressure Taiwan, and the U.S. sent a couple of carrier battle groups to the region to help defuse or force the Chinese, the PRC, Beijing, to back down, and it worked. The lesson China took was never again. We won't allow that to happen. We will not allow the U.S. to pressure us using military forces. Thus the buildup over the last 20 years. This buildup reflects in day-to-day interactions. So in the last 2 years, there's been 180 unsafe or unprofessional incidences, that's what we call it, of U.S. and Chinese forces interacting in the region. Think the EP3 incident in 2001, where a Chinese fighter plane intercepted a U.S. plane operating in international waters. The Chinese fighter plane basically came into contact with the U.S. plane, and it went down. The Chinese pilot died. The U.S. plane was forced to land in Chinese territory, and essentially sparked a very tense crisis for a number of weeks before they finally, after exploiting all the intelligence value they could out of the plane, returned the crew and the plane to the U.S. in boxes. Basically, they disassembled it and sent it back to us. That's the type of incident, though, that could easily spark a conflict in a different context. Any loss of military personnel could potentially lead to escalation. That one didn't. Future ones could. And we see that behavior, that pattern of behavior increasing. And it's not just with us. So 180 incidents with us, 100 incidents with our allies and partners over the same period of time. So 280 incidences of unsafe and unprofessional behavior, every one of those which could result in escalation. So that is a uncomfortable place to be. It's not completely abnormal. We've had this for years in the Soviet Union. Russia does it, but it is the fact that it's happening with China, the fact that they want to change the way the U.S. interacts with them in the region. This is concerning. And every one of those is just about crises getting out of control. So every one of them can matter. And then finally, back to Taiwan. Perhaps most importantly, President Xi has told his military to be ready to retake Taiwan by 2027. So, doesn't mean he's told them to take Taiwan, but he's told them to be in a position to retake Taiwan if he so directs. And that has many national security professionals worried, because if they get to the point where they judge they are capable, that just increases the possibilities that they will. And then there's obviously Taiwan. How do they act? Every Taiwanese election that comes up, there's the worry about, okay, is the party that wants independence going to win? Or is the party that's closer to Beijing going to win? Because every time that happens, that risks crisis. And as I said, Beijing considers Taiwan a core national security interest. They consider Taiwan part of China, and they are willing to act. And President Xi has said so much, told his military to be ready by 2027. So that is the world we live in. That is the global security environment today. And this is just a few of the ones that I chose to highlight. There's many other potential ones out there. These are the ones that, in my mind, have some of the potential to drag us into a large-scale conflict against near-peer adversaries, as we call them. So World War III. The next couple of slides, I'm just going to show a few commentators out there, national security professionals, respected experts in the field, who are increasingly writing about today's global security environment within the lens of the 1930s or World War III. First, you have George Will, a respected columnist for the Washington Post, writing about the war in Ukraine and comparing what we're seeing, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. At the time, it just looked like a regional conflict between Japan and Manchuria. Looking back today, many historians will say that was the beginning of World War II. And in his column, George Will was making that comparison. Is what we're seeing today in Ukraine the beginning of World War III? Is it the first battle of the next war? So he laid that out in his article. And most importantly, he said in his article that Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran are watching the outcome of what occurs in Ukraine, much like Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo did in the 1930s. And so implying a failure to act to enable Ukraine, allowing Russia to get away with the aggression, would embolden those other actors to act similarly in the future. Then you have Congressman McCall, the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee in May. So think somebody who looks at foreign affairs on a daily basis, has access to classified material, is briefed on it by national security experts routinely, asked by a reporter, what worries you most? And what he says is this unholy alliance between Russia, China, and Iran, North Korea, and the possibility of having to fight in multiple regions of the world simultaneously. That's what was on his mind in May of 2024 when asked that question by reporters. And Chairman McCall is not somebody who tends to overstate threats or be a chicken little. He's a pretty balanced individual, and as I said, he has access to all sorts of information that makes that disconcerting, but that's one of his biggest concerns. It's what's keeping him up at night. And more recently, the National Defense Commission on the National Defense Strategy I mentioned earlier, that bipartisan commission, noted that in the report that the U.S. today lacks the force structure to fight, force structure being the forces, to fight in two theaters simultaneously. So they can fight a war against Russia and a war against China simultaneously, or a war against Russia and a war against North Korea or Iran simultaneously, that we no longer have the force structure. For decades during the Cold War, that was our policy, was two major wars simultaneously. And then the Cold War ended. For a period of time, we had that same general force structure, but as we hoped for a more peaceful world, we changed to where we basically have a force structure capable of one major war. That commission's calling that out and calling for increased forces in order to be prepared for this sort of scenario. And then Phil Zelikow, diplomat and historian, wrote a very compelling piece that I highly recommend reading in the Texas National Security Review about the possibility of worldwide warfare. He compared what he saw as a historian of the 1930s to today's security environment and lays out in great detail in there how the opportunism, miscalculation, and rapid decision-making in the 30s led to World War II and sees very many similarities with today. And probably the most important part of that article was the quote up there where he put the probability of war at 20 or 30% between great powers. 20 or 30% is not very much, right? But if you consider the costs and the implications of a war between the U.S. and China or the U.S. and Russia, that's far higher than we would like that possibility. And again, Professor Zelikow is not an alarmist. He's a historian, very balanced, and he's looking at this through the lens of history in a very analytical perspective. So I highly recommend that article, but 20 to 30% chance. And then finally in May, June, just as a last example of this trend that you see in the national security commentator community, Andrea Kendall-Taylor, a former Deputy National Intelligence Officer, and Richard Fontaine, the president of the Center for New American Studies, a respected think tank, wrote an article about how they see this emerging axis of upheaval or cooperation between these countries with a shared aim of weakening the U.S. So it's not necessarily that they have a formal alliance, because they don't. There is no formal alliance between these nations, but they have a shared interest in a grudge against the current system, against the United States, that drives them to act in ways that are counter to our interests. And they highlight in this article that, like Rome, Tokyo, and Berlin, Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran don't have to have a coherent plan to undermine the U.S., but simply have to act in ways opportunistically that advance their shared interest in undermining the U.S., all of which can lead to an erosion of international norms and an increased chance of conflict. So again, another good article in Foreign Affairs by a couple of well-respected experts. The point of all of that is that there are serious thinkers out there. It's not just me, it's not the military sitting out here saying we need more resources. There are serious thinkers out there with no tie to military resourcing, advocating for preparing for the next conflict, thinking about, attempting to avoid, and most of them, if not all of them, emphasize deterrence as the way to avoid war. None of us want to go to war. But this is a growing conversation in the national security community that we should pay attention to. But it's not just the 1930s, it's not just World War II, it's not just get ready for war. It's also a trend in what the national security calls strategic competition, that struggle between autocracies and democracies for the future of the international order, that threatens our very fundamental values, our belief in democracy, both internally and across global governance as a method for global governance. And Ann Applebaum in Autocracy, Inc. probably is one of the most cogent articulations of that cooperation between this network of autocracies that are increasingly working together to erode global governance, erode democratic norms, and to enable each other. Think sanctions mitigation, so working with each other to overcome and to find ways to mitigate the effect of sanctions imposed by the community of democracies who believe that the international order is worth defending and use economic coercion as a tool to do that. These autocracies work together to avoid that. And they have a shared interest. And in her book, she talks about they have spheres of influence. And if you think about it, the ones that I've laid out have natural spheres of influence from their mind that they want to be the dominant power in. And she lays out how they work together. Great book that goes into that global collaboration. And we see just a couple of examples on here that I put up. We see a couple of examples of that partnership. So in May, the first one, you have President Xi and President Putin meeting in Beijing. This is the 40th time the two of them have met as world leaders. That's a deep, deep relationship when you talk about world leaders meeting that many times. Now, they've both been in power for a fair amount of time. President Xi is not going anywhere. President Putin doesn't appear to be going anywhere. So they will meet many more times. But their relationship is at the foundation of the Russia-China strategic partnership that we see. And while Russia and China do have some natural tensions as states, their personal relationship continues to drive it. But even as states, Russia and China have an interest in undermining U.S. dominance. So that strategic partnership continues to deepen. Prior to the Ukraine war, they called it a partnership with no limits. President Xi has not used that same terminology since the war, probably because China doesn't want to get drugged directly into it and also fears some of the sanctions we've threatened. But the point is, it's a deepening and very deep relationship. And then you have President Putin going to Pyongyang recently in June to meet with Kim Jong-un. During that meeting, they declared a mutual assistance pact. So they basically pledged to come to each other's aid in the event of aggression against either country. This represents a deepening diplomatic relationship between them that we haven't seen since the Cold War. This sort of essentially a security pact between the two. So that relationship continues to deepen. And this is just two examples of how these autocracies are collaborating or their relationship is deepening. Security experts are worried about this North Korea pact because the trade-off may be Russia has to help North Korea with development of its nuclear weapons program and its rockets program, both which pose direct threats to the United States and our allies. So again, these are things that the autocracies are doing to work together. And this is just two examples of the really deepening ties. You also see diplomatic messaging working in coordination. You see the economic activity both to mitigate sanctions as well as to help each other out. And you see the exchange of military technology between all those autocracies I mentioned. Essentially, again, that deepening relationships. These relationships have helped Russia rebuild its war machine. So everybody, I told you, 1 million casualties in the war in Ukraine since that started. That is significant casualties for Russia. And many people thought at the beginning of the war, what a shambolic military. The Russians, they're not really a threat. Look how badly they got beat up on by the Ukrainians. But the Russians have since rebuilt that war machine. They have a long history of endurance and resilience that sometimes is hard for us to comprehend. And they've rebuilt that war machine in part aided by those partners that they've had, Ukraine, Iran, China. but also because they've mobilized their economy for war. Russia today spends 7 to 8% of their GDP on defense. We barely spend 3% of our GDP. Now, those numbers, we spend more than they do, yes, but they're spending 7 to 8% of their GDP this year. 35% of their government spending is going to their defense and security services as part of this war. Think about that. 35% of what they spend is going to their security services and defense. That is giving them the foundation to rebuild their military, to sustain their military during the war and then rebuild it after the war. And they're enabled by that network of partners that I talked about. So, with this series of challenges around the world, in this framing of 1930s World War II, can we serve as the arsenal of democracy? We're enabling Ukraine today, right? Ukraine is still in the fight in the way they are because of U.S. and Western aid. You know, so people might say, hey, we're still an arsenal of democracy, we can do this. The question is, can we? In 1940, FDR gave a speech talking about how the U.S. had doubled the number of airplanes we produced in 1 year between 1930 and 1940, from 6,000 to 12,000. We produced 12,000 airplanes in 1940. We weren't in the war yet. We weren't really the arsenal yet, but that's how many we produced. But that we needed 50,000 planes per year. Well, by 1944, we were making 100,000 planes per year. We basically transformed our civilian economy, turned it into a wartime economy. We have not done that for Ukraine. We've improved, but we have not done that. And the question is, can we? During World War II, we produced 2 Liberty ships every 3 days. Think about that. We built those ships there in the middle. We built 2 of those every 3 days. We don't even have a 300-ship Navy anymore. We could not do that today. We don't have the shipyards to do that today. During the war, we produced 17 aircraft carriers. In the same period of time, Japan produced 6. I mean, that is industrial might there. Now, the wars today are not the same as they are in World War II, and I'm not saying they should be. But we no longer have that sort of industrial capacity. In 1940, 40% of U.S. GDP came from manufacturing. Today is 11%. So that's that base that's basically eroded. You know, our economy is a much more service-driven economy today than it was in 1940. In 1990, we had 51 prime contractors in the defense industrial base supplying the Defense Department. Today we have 5 contractors. Now a lot of that's mergers and acquisitions, but basically we have 5 companies that produce things at scale for the Department of Defense. And then, maybe most disconcerningly, a recent report for Congress. In 1939, Congress established the National Defense Stockpile. Think critical materials for a wartime economy, or for, in the event of a major crisis. Well, as of last year, we had $1.3 billion worth of assets in that defense stockpiles. That's enough to meet 37% of the military requirements in the event of a conflict, and 10% of essential civilian requirements. So global supply chains, great, right? They reduce costs, they enable us to get things cheaper and to make lots of things, but if you don't have the materials in the time of conflict, those things stop. So again, it would cost us a lot of money to get those stockpiles up to the levels that we want. We stopped doing it after the Cold War because it was not cost effective to keep all these materials on hand. It's a cost-benefit analysis, and that's where we are today. I guess the other thing I want to highlight on this one is that cartoon on the right of the slide. So this gets to the Lend-Lease, or this gets to the arsenal of democracy, right? That cartoon is from 1940. It's Hitler telling Uncle Sam, "You're playing with dynamite by arming Great Britain to sustain its fight." Similar to how Putin tells us today that we are playing with dynamite and occasionally threatens nuclear escalation. Putin himself having done that 16 times during this war since 2022, threatened nuclear escalation. And then his mouthpiece is doing it a whole lot more often, threatening the U.S. And Uncle Sam telling Hitler it would be playing with dynamite not to arm Great Britain to resist. Similar thing playing out today, just the question is, do we have the capacity to do it? Especially if we had to do it at scale and for multiple theaters. If we had to enable or work with Japan and the Philippines and South Korea with a war in the Indo-Pacific, as well as a war in any of those other places, be it Europe, Middle East, at the same time, our defense industrial base is strained just supporting Ukraine. So, something to think about. And of course, that creates opportunity for our adversaries, right? If they understand that just as well as we do. They see what's going on too. So this slide's an eye chart. I don't expect you to read the slide. All right, this comes from the Department of Defense website. Essentially, this is the Department of Defense communicating what have we done for Ukraine and the impact it's having in the United States. The key points I want to highlight from this slide are intended to show it's not all a bad news story. We are getting better. So the money we've committed to Ukraine so far has resulted in, we've committed $32 billion out of the $46 billion appropriated to replace stocks of stuff we had in storage that we sent to Ukraine. So that is, we've taken old stuff that we had, sent it to Ukraine, and we're replacing it with new stuff. That's a net good for us. Our stuff is now better, more modern than it was because we've given Ukraine the stuff we had on the shelf. $32 billion worth, $46 billion already appropriated for. We have committed $26 billion out of the $33 billion appropriated so far to buy stuff directly for Ukraine. So we buy it from industry and they ship it straight to Ukraine. That generates demand for the defense industrial base, which allows them to expand production lines and to have that capacity to do this sort of thing in the event we need them to. And then finally, we have directly spent $5 billion to expand production capacity in 18 states. So not only have we bought stuff that generate demand signal, we have enabled some of those defense contractors I talked about with $5 billion to expand their production capacity in key areas. And that impacts in over 18 states around the U.S. So the money we're giving to Ukraine isn't just going to Ukraine. It's not money going out the door and ending up in Kyiv or ended up on the front lines. It's going to the United States. And it's improving our readiness at the same time that it's enabling the Ukrainians to fight what I would argue is a very justified war against Russian aggression. So it is benefiting us in hopefully enhancing that deterrent capacity for the future as our adversaries see our defense industrial base improving. We've also, in January, the Department of Defense released its first ever defense industry strategy. So basically saying, how are we going to continue to make progress in this? First time we've done that, at least since World War II. And that is another step in the right direction. But there's still a long ways to go. And just to highlight, so somewhat good news story, but to bring us back down to earth, where do we stand? At the beginning of the war, we produced 9,155 shells a month. So 155 is the principal artillery round that is used in the conflict by the Ukrainians, and the principal round, ammunition that we use for our artillery. We produce 9,000 a month. Today we're producing 70,000 per month. Our plans to get to 100,000 per month by 2025. It's good, right? Well, Ukraine uses 2,000 rounds per day. And they only use 2,000 because they don't have more. The chief of the Ukrainian staff has said they need 15,000 rounds per day or 450,000 rounds per month to sustain the war at the level of intensity they're fighting right now, which is a stalemate. Neither side's really advancing. Think about that, 450,000 rounds. That's more than we produce in the US and Europe on a monthly basis. And Russia uses between 10 and 45,000 rounds per day. So 300,000 to 1.3 million per month rounds of ammunition. That is very large. It's not as large as World War II or World War I, but it is large and it exceeds our defense industrial base today and what we have planned for 2025. So we continue to consume these stockpiles that need to be rebuilt at some point. So it's getting better, but it's not even sufficient today to meet the demands of Ukraine. Now, we're not in this alone. As I mentioned, Europe's also mobilizing its economy in ways. So this is not just a U.S.-only problem. This is a ally and partner problem too, and we are working on it. But that's the scale of the challenge we're talking about. So with all that said, the War College has spent the last couple of years studying protracted war and the lessons from Ukraine pretty closely. A couple of, we call them integrated research projects, so I think between 10 and 20 students all writing papers specifically on these topics, as well as many other individual students writing on these two sort of topics. These are just a few of the key conclusions from those studies that I thought I'd share with you guys today. The first and most important one, I think, is that to deter World War III, we must be prepared to win it. And I got it. I'm the military guy up here saying we must be, deterrence through strength, that's what we need. But that is a lesson of history, and that's something that these research projects have found, that the best way to avoid these wars is to deter them. Don't even let them start. The deterrence, obviously, is about will and capability. We have to have the will and the capability to fight. And most importantly, when it comes to deterrence, our adversaries have to believe we have the will and capability to fight that war. If they don't believe that, then deterrence won't work. And so that's why I talk so much about the defense industrial base. If our adversaries don't believe we have the capacity to fight these wars, then these wars become more likely. Then you have production and logistics. Critical to protracted warfare, which great power wars tend to be protracted because both sides have the capacity to endure for a long period of time. These aren't the US and Iraq in the 1990s or the early 2000s. This isn't large power versus small or medium power. These are two big powers with large industries, geographic space, and the ability to endure punishment. So they do tend to become protracted. And in protracted wars, production and logistics is critical. We talked a little bit about defense industrial base, but even logistics. Our adversaries have watched, they've seen us, we build a mountain of material, and then we go to war. They're not going to let that happen in the next war. And part of the problem is technology now increasingly enables them to disrupt logistics from the factory all the way to the theater. The cyber attack on Colonial Pipeline in 2023. That was just a very small scale example of what could happen at a much larger scale in a large conflict with a sophisticated adversary like Russia or China who has the capacity to interfere, get into our industrial systems and interfere with daily logistics, much less just the military movement of stuff. So the homeland is not safe is the point. And our adversaries will target us during any conflict. So logistics is a vulnerability. The allies and partners is another key point. Allies and partners are critical for success in warfare. But they are something that we've identified as a strategic advantage in the United States, and I firmly believe that. Allies and partners give us the ability to project power, because we can use bases, we can use their territory, they will help us. They give us additional forces, so if China has to face the US and the Indo-Pacific, it won't be just us. It will also be Japan, it will also be the Philippines, it will also be Australia. So it increases the number of forces we have, and based on what I told you about Ukraine, it expands the stockpile of munitions we have. For instance, South Korea has provided ammunition to Ukraine. South Korea has no real interest in the war in Ukraine itself, other than deterring future wars, but they're providing ammunition. Same thing could happen in any great power conflict. Not only the allies and partners that we fight with, but other allies and partners may contribute too. So allies and partners are a critical factor in any future war. The fourth one, the US way of war is different than the way Russia and Ukraine have fought. It's more reliant on high-tech and complex systems, which give us more precision, which gives us greater effect. But those systems require microchips, require global supply chains, require long lead times, and those are things we're not expanding the production of for Ukraine. We're not radically expanding the types of high-tech precise munitions that we would see ourselves using, or that we plan to use in any conflict. So the other one that I haven't really talked on from our side is casualties. So I talked about 1 million casualties in Russia and Ukraine today. Well, Army planners estimate that in a war with a peer adversary, with another great power, we would suffer 50,000 casualties, Army alone, in the first 2 weeks of that war. That's more casualties than we took in the entirety of 20 years of the War on Terror. That's the scale that we're talking about, 50,000 casualties, 2 weeks. That matters because the IRR, the inactive ready reserve, think pool of strategic manpower, people with some military training who could be called up and brought back to active service in the event of conflict. During the height of the Cold War in 1973, during the Arab-Israeli War, we had 750,000 people with military training liable to be called back up and back to service in the event we went to war with the Soviets. By 1993, at the end of the war against Iraq, we still had 450,000 people who could be called back. Today we have 75,000 people in the active ready reserve. If we took 50,000 casualties in the first 2 weeks of a war, we barely have enough to replace them, much less round out the formations that need those people in the event of major conflict. That's important, and it's important because can we sustain the all-volunteer force? And this impacts all of America. I have only served in the all-volunteer force, and I will sing its praises to the day I die. The commitment, the patriotism, the people I've served with will amaze you. But we can't generate enough people as it is. We have a recruiting crisis today to get people in. In the event of a major conflict where we're taking 50,000 casualties in 2 weeks, do we think people are going to be showing up left and right to sign up for that? I'm skeptical. So is an all-volunteer force still the right answer? It's expensive. It costs money to pay people to do this. Maybe a draft. Maybe it's time to start thinking about a draft so that we could rebuild that pool of inactive reservists. Think people having to come do 2 to 3 years of service, then go about your life, but now you've had some military training, you can be recalled to active duty. It worked for decades. It's a question that would impact everybody. And people are increasingly writing about that. So it's not just me standing up here. There are people writing about this. The article on the right is by my colleague who gave this pitch when you came to the War College, that he published writing about this, advocating for the end of the all-volunteer force and a return to the draft. And then I think I've talked sufficiently about the defense industrial base and manpower there in the end. So the key takeaways I want to leave you with before giving you one concluding thought are here. So the security environment today is complex, it's challenging, it's filled with flashpoints, it has the potential for escalation. It is a risky world. Phil Zelikow says 20 to 30% chance of war. In this axis of upheaval that is out there, is increasingly collaborated, has a shared interest, and it doesn't matter if they do it formally through an alliance or if they simply act opportunistically. If you read 2034, Admiral Stavridis and Spencer Ackerman wrote it. It lays out this sort of scenario where China and the U.S. get in a war, and then Russia acts opportunistically to take advantage of it in Europe, and Iran acts in the Middle East. That's the type of thing that could be very conceivable in the future, where they act individually without coordinating with each other, but opportunistically to take advantage of the U.S. being distracted by any one of the other adversaries. You have the Russo-Ukraine war has accelerated cooperation between these allies. I didn't give you the stats, but Iran has provided Russia with over 4,000 drones that they've used to strike infrastructure targets, energy infrastructure primarily in Ukraine. And they've built a factory in Russia to produce 6,000 more a year. China provides Russia with 90% of the microchips it needs to sustain its economy. And 70%, 75% of the machine tools Russia needs. So they're helping each other. This collaboration is increasing. North Korea has reportedly offered to provide Russia with troops, not to fight in Ukraine, but primarily like engineered troops that can do things out of combat that will then free up Russian troops to fight in combat, because Russia is under a manpower crunch. So again, it's accelerated that cooperation. Maybe the most important thing, President Xi is learning from this war in Ukraine. The big question, right, is what does he learn? Does he learn that the West will respond decisively to prevent aggression and punish aggression? Or does he learn that Western will erodes over time and you simply have to outlast the West? Does he learn that threatening nuclear escalation limits Western responses and that we will be deterred? Or does he learn that making threats of nuclear escalation isolates the country that makes them? It makes you a pariah. And does he learn that economic sanctions can effectively coerce and bring an adversary to their knees? Or does he learn that they can be mitigated by pre-planning and through cooperation with your partners? Those are three big questions that will likely drive what he decides to do about Taiwan in the future. So maybe that's the most important takeaway I want you to take from the day is, what is President Xi learning? And then, war remains unpredictable, highly contingent. You wouldn't ever hear a military officer talk without talking about Karl von Clausewitz. So he's a famous military Prussian theorist who wrote the book on war. He writes about war being unpredictable, fog, friction, and chance drive war. Russia invaded Ukraine thinking they were going to win in 2 weeks. And here we are 2 years later, and the war drags on. Nobody wants to get into war, but everybody believes they'll win quickly when they do. That is rarely the case. So again, back to the theme I said at the beginning, deterrence being the most important thing. Let's deter war before it even starts, because once it starts, you don't know where it's going to go. And then finally, the character of warfare is changing. That may be the second most important point on here. Again, this goes to that unintended escalation, the use of drones, AI, in Ukraine, in Russia, is just a small example of what we would see if we had two larger powers fighting each other, or some conglomeration of powers fighting each other. But that technological change can drive warfare to extremes that we haven't experienced since World War II. And we should be concerned about that. So finally, as I wrap up, I just want to leave you with this part of thought. And if I have time, I'll take questions. Yeah. Tim Schneider, Yale historian, has written about Ukraine as comparing it to 1938 when Neville Chamberlain returned from surrendered Czechoslovakia to the Nazis. But this time Czechoslovakia is fighting back. They're not rolling over. The Ukrainians will not roll over. If we stop aiding the Ukrainians, they will lose the conventional fight, but they will continue to fight. They do not want to go back under the Russian yoke. And I turn it over to you, which one's worse? The war that we have now, or a war that drags on with the brutality of Russian occupation of Ukraine, where Ukraine continues to fight, and we have to watch that day to day for decades because the Ukrainians will not quit. One of the Ukrainians has said they will fight as long as there is a single child with a plastic knife in their country. They have the will to continue that fight. So if it's 1938 and World War III is going to start next year, are we prepared? I think that's part of what today's talking about is preventing that from happening, but I think it's a good question to leave it. So with that, actually, I'm sorry, one last thing. John Nagel used this the other day, so I wanted to use this quote. What we want is we want President Putin, President Xi, we want them to look out their window every day and go, nope, today's not the day that I want to start a fight with the U.S. And I don't want to do it tomorrow. And I don't want to do it the day after tomorrow. That is what we want. That's why I've talked about what I've talked about here, is we want our adversaries to say every day to say, nope, not today and not tomorrow. That's what we want. So, thank you.
Well, please join me. We're going to take questions. You know what? We're going to take questions, but the first thing I want to do is just to open it up as we get, is that one of the key things you said was they have to believe and I have to tell you, Americans aren't united, not even on Ukraine. So how can we convince anyone, let alone China, that we have the will, right, to defend our allies and to even defend our homeland, right?
So, as an active military officer, I'm not going to wade into the politics of that question, but the part of it I will wade into, it's what we do in the military on a daily basis. It is the forward positioning of troops, the troops forward representing the United States in position to show our adversaries that we will respond and that we have the capability to respond. That's why in the Indo-Pacific, we regularly have carrier battle group there. We regularly sail through what the Chinese claim to be their territorial waters to show that we're there. That's why if North Korea fires a missile over Japan, We are making statements about our willingness to shoot it down. We have military forces that are prepared to, so that as the military, we are providing politicians with the tools to enable diplomacy. That's what we do on a daily basis. How do we unify America? That's a question that I.
Well, the final word is that you'd have to be given permission to use your arms. So anyway, let's take some at the back.
Hi, my name is Ella Rossmiller. I'm an assistant professor of political science and world studies at Wilson College. I very much appreciated your lecture, very fact-based, alarming. I learned new things from it. I'm also familiar with counter discourses, and you are too, because you're an expert in this. So I'd like to raise 3 of those and get your response to that, because I think that this is really going to help move the conversation forward. So the first thing is questioning whether high military spending is indicative of strength or weakness. If we look at the history of the Soviet Union, part of the reason it imploded was because there was such high military spending over a long period of time, including a protracted war in Afghanistan.
Ella,
And don't
could we,
know,
because we got a lot of people.
Yeah,
So
sure.
quick questions. Yeah.
So that's number 1, that this could have a weakening effect. Number 2, related to that, our deficit is currently $35 trillion. We have no clue how to pay it down. Number 3, related to that, Foreign Policy Magazine published an article by Wes Mitchell, and he said something that I think many of us have heard before. In order to increase military spending, we need to cut social spending. I'm an educator. I see in the classroom every day the effects of divesting in youth. We have today a generation that has the poorest mental health and physical health of many previous generations going back to the 30s, according to medical doctors and psychologists. So given all of that, I'm wondering if you could respond to that and say, is there a way of kind of moving the conversation forward and transcending all of these debates?
Thanks, Ella. Some of those kids may be drafted. But
So that actually, I'll start with that one. So one answer is the draft. It would be cheaper in terms of people costs to get the people necessary. To the question of resourcing, absolutely. The NDS, the Commission on the NDS acknowledges that this would require higher taxes and decreased social spending. That's a bipartisan commission of politicians and academics and others writing that it requires both. And that's pretty impressive that we got a bipartisan group of people to say it requires both more taxes and reduced spending. I don't pretend to be the guy who can figure that part out. What we in the military talk about is that when you have a gap between your or between your ends, your goals, and your resources, that are at risk. What we have to do is either reduce our ends or increase our resources to get the strategy back in balance. And that would require some of the things you talked about. And I absolutely acknowledge the potential. The high cost can hollow out the domestic strength. And the national security strategy highlights, by the Biden administration, that the foundation of all of this is strong domestic economy. So that's a balancing act that is beyond my pay grade, beyond my expertise. I am simply highlighting some of the threats, acknowledging some of the challenges that our policymakers face, and hopefully that's the type of thing you all are going to talk about today, who are probably far more qualified to figure out solutions than I am to the resourcing piece. Again, the military frequently will talk about risk, and that's a political decision. How much risk are we willing to take? I've laid out just some of the potential costs of that risk. That doesn't mean that we have to do these things I said. It's just, again, back to risk decision. Hopefully that, basically there's no easy answer from my fault.
Please, go ahead.
My name is Virginia Berger. I'm a professor emeritus at the University of Washington. My question is, I want to question your assumption that the best way to preserve peace is to prepare for war. I would counter that one of the problems in humankind and in terms of needs for our evolution is we have never developed effective conflict resolution as an alternative to using weapons to solve our differences. And there is seminal work starting on conflict resolution, and the younger generation in the room, please take it forward and work on this. Conflict resolution that works locally with individuals and at the national level. Does this matter? Is there an urgency? Yes, and something that we're not facing. It's not a matter of when there is nuclear war. It's going to happen. It's a matter of when. Did you realize the United States has arsenals? They have sufficient nuclear weapons to destroy the world, the end of humankind. Check out Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University. They already have the nuclear weapons.
So I think we have to get a question because a lot of people want to have some conversation. So one question to him. She's raising a good point about conflict resolution.
This is that, and this is what I want to share. And I came all the way here to do this. That pay attention. You kindly pointed out all these partnerships that have been developed between Russia, North Korea, and China. Previously, they did not have the means of aiming their nuclear weapons on our eastern shore. This is changing now that they partnered with Russia. Did you notice?
Professor, we are going to have others talking about this in a.
This is important.
Ma'am, we
Cuba.
really have to go move on. We will allow you to speak later, okay?
Now,
We will.
Story of my life, I'm a woman, and my
Ginger.
We are going to allow you, but there are other
I was
people
going to
here.
talk 2 more sentences, and you kindly let me finish my thoughts. Now I'm tired of it.
All right, let's continue. Are there any other questions on the, yes, go ahead, Bezan.
It seems to me that you or your colleagues are trying to get the masses of the population ready for the Third World War. And you say that will be for deterrent. What about drumming the same kind of a drumming to get the pieces or the parts of those countries that are adversaries come together and find a way to de-escalate it and diffuse it before it blows up?
I absolutely agree. I would prefer that. Secretary Gates, when he was the Secretary of Defense, offered to provide Department of Defense money to the Department of State to enable the Department of State to do diplomacy. I absolutely would prefer diplomacy any day of the week to fighting. My point is you need strength to enable that diplomacy. That's my only point. I absolutely agree. I agree with, I would rather see less nuclear weapons than more nuclear weapons. I would rather see diplomacy over war. My point just is, I believe, and it is an assumption I make, looking at history, that weakness invites aggression. And I think you're seeing that play out today in today's world. And there's, again, back to there's risk involved in that situation, and it's not a science. You can't determine exactly where you will, where you have to be in order to deter conflict. There's a lot of art involved with that. But I absolutely agree. More resources to the Department of State. It doesn't overcome how we pay for it, but I would like to see more. And if that means cutting military spending, that's a risk decision that policymakers have to make. But I think they work hand in glove, diplomacy and strength.
And if you talk to people at U.S. State Department and people in diplomacy, they will tell you they're depleted. They've been, just the whole diplomacy issue of the U.S. is like sad. Okay, that's simply the truth. We do have a U.S. Institute of Peace that also is actively working on the international stage for conflict resolution in Washington. I was a fellow there for a while. So there are these things going, but the truth is over the past, I would say 10 years, it has not been strong diplomacy that we've had. And do you have a disagreement with that? No, yeah, unfortunately. Yes, go ahead. You had a question? Oh, okay. Anyone? Yes.
Yes, I have a
We
question.
have about 5, but yeah.
Okay. So my question is from a European perspective, or actually from your perspective looking towards Europe. Do you see a change how Europe is behaving, and do you like that change, or do you, let's say, from a military perspective, do you see there's still improvement?
I would say absolutely. I see a significant change in Europe's choices since Russia invaded Ukraine. you see Europe's trying to stand up, in part because they now see Russia as a bigger threat than they did prior to 2022, and also, unfortunately, because they don't see the U.S. as a reliable partner as they did prior to the last 10 years. So they fear, I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Europe increasingly fears the U.S. will no longer provide the security guarantee that we have for decades. That, combined with a recognition of Russia as a persistent threat, a chronic threat, has caused Europe to definitely step forward more. General Cavoli, the U.S. commander in Europe and the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces, has said that we need to provide the capability for Europe to complete that stand-up so that they are more capable of carrying the fight in the future than they are today. So I think we're on the right track from where I stand. And my last assignment was in Europe, in Germany. So I would go back there in a heartbeat. But the point is, I think we're on the right track, and it just takes time.
Well, please join me in thanking There was so much in what he presented that it was hard to even, I mean, there's so many questions I still have, but that shows how complicated this topic is. But we're going to now delve deeper into some of the specific issues that I think Colonel Chase raised. And I am now going to invite our panelists to come forward. And perhaps the idea is that I will call them forth and let you know a little bit about them as we proceed with our discussion. We have with us Dr. Cristina Ciocirlan, yes, a distinguished professor of business at Elizabethtown College, specializing in environmental psychology, diversity and inclusion, and organizational behavior. A 2015 U.S. Fulbright Scholar, she conducted groundbreaking research on environmental behaviors in organizations at Durham University in the UK. She has consulted with businesses both locally and internationally, and her research has been recognized with multiple Best Paper Awards at national and state conferences. She is widely peer-reviewed in journals and teaches courses in management, talent development, and people analytics. Please come forward. Dr. Cristina, come. We also have with us the Dean of the School of Business here at Elizabethtown College, who's also a member of our board of directors. She holds a PhD in economics at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and has over 20 years of experience in higher education. Dr. Najiba Benabes is recipient of the Dean of the Year Award from the Academic Global Business Advancement. She presented research globally and has published extensively. She's also a peer reviewer for the Higher Learning Commission and completed leadership training at Harvard Business School in 2020. We also invite Dr. David Commins, a professor of history at Dickinson College. His teaching interests are in modern Middle Eastern history, with an emphasis on Islamic thought and political movements. His most recent book is The Mecca Uprising, an Insider's Account of Salafism and Insurrection in Saudi Arabia. And last but certainly far from least, we have with us Dion Lassiter. He's the current executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, where he investigates complaints of unlawful discrimination in areas like unemployment, housing, commercial property, education, and public accommodations. A nationally recognized expert in the field of American race relations, Dion Lassiter has worked on race, peace, and poverty issues in the United States, Africa, Canada, Haiti, Israel, and Norway. And he is called upon frequently by media outlets to provide commentary on race relations and on potential solutions. So with that, you have our panelists. So here's how we're going to begin. We're going to start with the international, and they're going to make our way to the domestic issues with Chad. So let's kick it off with having Dr. David Commins step in and tell us about the Middle East.
Okay, should I do it from here?
Whatever you want.
I have 3 slides.
Whatever you can come here, or whatever is easiest for you. Yes, please.
Thank you. How
unless you want us to help you.
I'm technologically challenged. First of all, I want to thank Joyce and the World Press Council of Harrisburg for holding this symposium and for inviting me to contribute to it. I really appreciate the opportunity. So, paths to peace in the Middle East. It's hard for me to imagine paths. I think of obstacles to peace in the Middle East, unfortunately. And all I want to do really is identify the different kinds of conflict. There is no single kind of conflict taking place in the Middle East. And because there are different kinds of conflict, it's, I think, a real challenge to have a vision of different paths that might converge to bringing peace to that region. So these are just examples. There are civil wars in Yemen and Syria that broke out in the aftermath of attempts by people in those two countries to overthrow authoritarian regimes that have been in power for decades and to bring into existence humane democratic governments that recognize the rights of citizens to security, freedom, and dignity. In the case of Syria, the government declared war on the population, quite simply, and with the assistance of Russia and Iran, was able to crush the uprising, but the aftermath of that uprising has been a fragmentation of Syria, so that the government really only has control over maybe a quarter of the territory. In Yemen, the civil war also erupted in the aftermath of the uprising of 2011, but the civil war didn't really break out until late 2014, early 2015, and that had roots in a previous conflict between the national government and a regional political movement that went back to the early 2000s, led by a religious revivalist movement called the Houthis, who since have taken over the national capital and are in conflict with the national government in exile. But to give an idea of the complexity of the Yemeni civil war, it's not just a matter of the Houthi militia versus the national government. There is also a regional secessionist movement in the south that wants to break away from the national government no matter what. So Yemen has a civil war that was further exacerbated by the decision by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, to intervene in 2015 to try to defeat the Houthis, an effort that failed but brought tremendous misery, destruction, and death to people throughout Yemen. So you have two civil wars for which at the moment there is not really a clear path to peace, although it is true that a year and a half ago, Saudi Arabia and Houthis reached a ceasefire, and there was some hope that perhaps a ceasefire between the United Arab Emirates pulled out, the Saudis and the Houthis seem to be agreeing to a truce that's held now for a year and a half. But truce is not peace. Okay. Then you have fragile states in Iraq and Lebanon. Both countries went through civil war. Of course, Lebanon had a civil war from 1975 to 1990 that didn't really resolve the underlying constitutional issues that generated the civil war in Lebanon. Kind of a stalemate took place, and the only real winners in the civil war were the warlords who rose to power during that war as the heads of different militias, and now they control the country, along with Hezbollah, which is another creature of the civil war, and they basically treat the civilian population as sheep to be sheared. It's a total kleptocracy in Lebanon. In Iraq, of course, the United States invaded in 2003, imagining in March that by September we'd be out, right? There was this psychedelic notion, really, in Washington, D.C., sponsored by the neoconservatives, that the U.S. would invade. It would be a cakewalk. It would create a democracy. Democracy would spread to the rest of the region. They'd make peace with Israel. There'd be an Israeli embassy. It was absolutely psychedelic. But for some reason, the Bush administration drank that Kool-Aid, went to war, and of course, American troops were there for more than 8 years and had to go back because the government that we set up created so much resentment on the part of 1/3 of the population that they supported the Islamic State, which took over a large part of the country, and the U.S. had to go back to try to retake Iraqi territory from the Islamic State. So that was a successful campaign, this campaign against the Islamic State. To an extent, we're still fighting the Islamic State. The Islamic State is still carrying out attacks on American forces in the region. And the Iraqi government is really incapable, it's too fragile to pacify it. Libya, of course, another case of state failure in the aftermath of the uprisings of 2011. Now it's divided between two governments in different capitals. And then, of course, right now everybody's focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where Israel is fighting Hamas in Gaza, exchanging fire with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and carrying out raids against Palestinians in the West Bank, and looking the other way when Israeli settlers carry out attacks on Palestinian civilians, a conflict that is, well, sadly not really mitigated by American policy. But these are just different kinds of conflicts. So this is what I'm asked about Path to Peace. I think more about what are the obstacles. Who obstructs peace? So why isn't there peace? I don't know. Okay. I've studied the region, for decades, but I can give you a list of people or parties that are often blamed for peace, and it would take an entire day to unpack all this. But a lot of people blame terrorists, such as the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, all right? A lot of people blame Iran as sort of like the godfather of instability in the Middle East. A lot of people blame Arab rulers for fomenting conflict for their own cynical domestic purposes. A lot of people blame Israel and Israeli expansionism or Israeli insecurity. And a lot of people blame the United States for propping up different powers that oppressed populations in different parts of the Middle East, and these oppressed populations are merely resisting Western colonial domination. So these are different options for thinking about who is obstructing peace. And then finally, what are the options for ending conflict in the Middle East? Military triumph is one, all right? I don't think it works very well. I think what Dr. Metcalf said about Ukraine pertains to the Middle East. When an army tries to go in and control a foreign population, the occupied population fights back. And I think that if Israel were to destroy Hamas, the fact that Palestinians don't have self-determination and security and dignity means that they're going to continue fighting for generations. Another option is maximum pressure, all right, which was a Bush and Trump policy towards Iran. It was a Clinton-Bush policy towards Iraq until we invaded. But maximum pressure didn't bring the results that it was intended to. Of course, proponents of maximum pressure would say we didn't have enough time. Okay. Another option is to put out fires when they break out. That was an option that worked for a while in the 2000s with Israel vis-a-vis Gaza and Lebanon. There were some short conflicts between Israel, Hamas, and Gaza, and between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Violent, destructive for sure, but of shorter duration. Putting out fires, I think the Saudis tried to put out a fire in Yemen by intervening, and it didn't seem to work. They didn't understand the landscape there, didn't understand their lack of capacity. Maybe managing stalemates, accepting an absence of a resolution, but being satisfied with an unsatisfactory outcome where no side wins. And do we define peace as the absence of war? That is, if we look at the last 11 months in Gaza, nearly 12 months now in Gaza, as bad as things were before October 7th, was that better? Well, it certainly was for Israel, all right? After 40,000 and counting Palestinian deaths, arguably better for Palestinians. But is that acceptable? Is it manageable? So I'm sorry I don't have a path to peace. I will say one thing, though. And this reminds me of something about your presentation and sort of grand strategy. Something very odd happened a year and a half ago, where Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to restore diplomatic relations. And this was done at a summit in China. And the United States felt a little bit miffed, I think, that China was the mediator in that instance. And when you go back and you trace how that occurred, it goes back to an attack by Iran on Saudi oil installations in 2019. And the Saudi government thought the United States would retaliate against Iran for attacking Saudi oil installations. And instead of retaliating, the Trump administration kind of shrugged and said, they shouldn't do that, and if they do it again, they'll pay for it. And I think the Saudis realized at that point, they cannot depend on the United States to be their muscle, basically. And I think that was a good thing. They started having conversations with diplomats in the government of Oman, which plays a fantastic sort of hidden diplomatic role in the Middle East, all right? And then they started having meetings in Baghdad, at the embassy in Baghdad, with the Iranians, and they realized that, all right, but it's less conflicted than it was until that time. And it's just an odd thing, and I don't know if an American gesture that we're not going to interfere is always going to lead to that. It's just too unpredictable. But that's food for thought. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We all fear that the Middle East is actually going to be the beginning of Armageddon. So we'll delve a little bit more into that. But there's another issue that I know young people in this room, because we hear it all the time in our summer internship. People are worried about climate change. Dr. Ciocirlan, can we avoid Armageddon with climate change?
Yes, I believe so. I'm an optimist. So. Yeah, I'm going to stand over here so that I can see everybody and you can see me. I don't like being behind the podium. Okay, so yes, after on a positive note, the two positive presentations, let's talk about climate change, right? I'm gonna summarize a little bit about what is climate change, what are the consequences, and maybe what can we do about it. And please stop me if I go over 10 minutes. So climate change is defined basically as a warming of the surface temperature of 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is about 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to pre-industrial times, right? 1800s. So what causes climate change? There used to be a controversy, debate, whether the role of humans in climate change, but now most of the scientists agree. I think the percentage is 97% or so, agree that it's caused by the burning of fossil fuels by humans. So I'm not even going to worry about the 3% who disagree. Okay, when is it happening? It's happening now, right? And it's been happening for several decades when the climate is changing, right, affecting populations, species. As you can see here, this is a very hungry polar bear, right? So starting to change his fur, the color, to fit the new environment. This all used to be ice and snow around him, right? So other consequences are we are losing biodiversity, right? The oceans are getting warmer, which means this is killing corals. There's going to be more droughts. This is a picture from Sicily from this year. All of this used to be green. Now, as you can see, it's a desert. And this particular summer, the Sicilian government had to choose between using water for tourism or agriculture. And guess what they chose? They chose tourism, right? Because if you're a tourist, go there, you want to take a shower and there's no water, right? So they were really afraid that they're going to lose tourism. Unfortunately, this hurt agriculture. Farmers sometimes had to kill their flock because they were not able to feed them, or hurricanes are getting stronger, right? Water provides more energy. So
Also wildfires, we're going to see more wildfires in the future just because of the dry temperature, the increased temperatures. Climate migration, right? Where is everybody going to go, right? If you're a farmer in Guatemala and now you cannot grow crops because it's a desert around you, you move up, right? So, and there is a study done by Alan Kroger, the famous labor economist, together with Michael Oppenheimer, his climate scientist. They are predicting, one of their models, because there are different scenarios, right? But one of their models is predicting an increase of migrants from Central America by 6.7 million migrants displaced because of climate change. 1.5 million a year are going to move up. So there is a really serious issue. Now, what can we do as individuals, right? Can we really affect, slow down this process? And the reason is, I mean, the answer is yes, we can. Scientists predicted that we were on a course of getting to an increase of 4 degrees Celsius by 2100 if we did nothing, right? Which would have been a disaster. But we, governments started to mobilize and pass policies and programs. So because of that, they were able to reduce that number. So we are not going to, towards destruction. But there's still things we can do. For example, say no to single-use plastic, because very little plastic gets recycled. Less than 10% actually gets recycled. There is a garbage patch twice the size of France, no, 3 times the size of France, I think, between Hawaii and California. All the plastic flowing down from rivers into the ocean, right? The picture on the top is a picture of microplastics, because plastic under sun decomposes into microplastics, which is a problem because fish eat them and then we eat them when we eat fish. So it's, and they get into lots of other products. And many companies put the sign of the chasing arrow sign of recycling on products that are not really recyclable. So that's a form of greenwashing. But California recently passed a law that says you have to demonstrate that your products are recyclable before you are able to put that chasing arrow sign on your products, which I thought it's common sense, but obviously they were not doing that. So this is a little bit of good news. Yesterday, the owner of this company spoke on radio on WITF. This is a company in Lancaster. It's called Refillism. And the idea is, so they sell eco-friendly products, and the idea is that we shouldn't buy so many containers of plastic with shampoo and conditioner and body wash. How people can bring their own containers and have them filled with shampoo, conditioner, and body wash, and have them measured by weight, right? You pay by weight, and then go back home, So it's very, but I dream of a world when this is not going to be news, right? A company like that. This is going to be how companies use, do it on a regular basis, and the news is going to be about a company that doesn't do this, right? But the 5 R's of environmental protection, right? Reduce, repair, restore, reuse, recycle. I think the R that's probably forgotten is the reduce, right? We don't need so much stuff. We could reduce our use of stuff. Also, we could repair our clothes, and this is an extreme actually. It's a picture from Patagonia. It's an outdoor company, outdoor clothes company of California. Why should we throw things away? Why not repair them if we can? Now, again, putting duct tape on your pants and walking around, it's not a good idea. But there are other things you can do. You could travel cleaner, right? Maybe most of you noticed when you search for a flight, you get a list of flights and you see the carbon footprint of each flight, and you can choose that way. If you're mindful of we waste less food. In the United States, we waste about 1/3 of all food that is produced. So it goes into landfills. And the problem with that is that it generates methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas, rotting in the landfills. So yes, and we should try to eat the ugly fruits and vegetables, those that do not look very good. Maybe they have a stain or something, or right. And the picture here on the bottom is from a non-profit in London. It's called Save the Crust, because apparently a lot of British people, when they make a sandwich, they cut the part of the crust, and there's like a mountains of crust in the landfills, and that generates methane. It's possible to use the ugly fruits and vegetables. This is an example of a restaurant in San Francisco, and they are called food waste paradise, because their business model is around using the products that are not very pretty, but they're still good. As you can see, funny looking carrots and apples with stains and such. In terms of a diet, we could maybe reduce our consumption of beef and lamb, because these are the two highest carbon footprint foods produced in our food system. Thinking before we stream something. This is an example of the Despacito hit in the summer of 2018. Luis Fonsi and Yankee Daddy. It was downloaded 5 billion times that summer. And few people think about the environmental impact of streaming, but a study calculated that the energy it took to download it 5 billion times would power the energy, these 5 countries, small countries in Africa, of course, but still, for a year. So the entire energy needed to power these countries for a year. So I don't really have a solution for this, for not streaming. I mean, we probably could not go back to using CDs and DVDs, but just thinking about maybe not leaving the YouTube open and not watching it, right? I don't know. Thinking before you search, especially doing an AI search, because artificial intelligence is great. However, it uses a ton of energy. One simple search using ChatGPT can power a light bulb for 20 minutes. So just something to think about. Bloomberg study looked at the number of data centers consumed by electricity, and they calculated it could be as much energy as the entire country of Italy consumes. So now there's also a benefit, of course. AI is very beneficial. It could create clean energy solutions, right? So contribute to learning about how we can protect the environment, but just to think about searching and using AI on a regular basis, because there are a million people, right, using. Shop from thrift stores, give clothes a second chance, right? 85% of textiles produced in the US ends up in the landfill. So give clothes a second chance. It was interesting. I spent some time in Italy over the summer, and also I spent my sabbaticals in Italy, and I mentioned this as environmentally friendly option, and they were mortified. They're just not. It's not part of their culture, right, to shop in thrift stores. However, so that's why I think there needs to be some cultural change, some paradigm shift in how we think about what we consume, right? It's good to plant native plants. So the picture on the left, a typical lawn, English lawn, very well manicured like that. It's a dead ecosystem, right? Nothing grows there. The picture on the right, native plants thrive, and so do pollinators, right? Bees and And again, this is a cultural, it might be very difficult to do, to change the mindset, right? So it's important to advocate, write to your senator, write to your policymakers, because this works, it's possible, right? This is an example of two sisters in England who wrote to Kellogg's saying that Kellogg should not use palm oil in Indonesia to make their cereal. And they were successful. Kellogg's surprisingly listened to them, and they reduced or even eliminated, I think, the palm oil from their cereal production. So are we spinning? So sometimes we're thinking, as a small individual, what can I do? Can I affect really climate change? Are we spinning our wheels? And especially when news comes out that Jeff Bezos went to space, right, with space tourism, and in one day using so much fuel that all your efforts that you've done in 1 year are canceled, right? You recycle, you reuse, and everything. And he goes to space and uses so much oil, fuel. So, but the answer is yes. It still matters what we do, especially here in the U.S. One person, the efforts that one American middle-class person does matter much more than the efforts that maybe a farmer in Bangladesh does, just because we have a higher carbon footprint here in the U.S. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. We've done Armageddon in the Middle East. We've done the climate change, and now we're moving to a really difficult topic, right? How do we deal with homegrown extremism in our own country, right? That's why Chad is here. Chad, take the floor.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I don't have any slides, but I'm excited about all that I've heard. And I think it's very important to also provide a disclosure that though I am the head of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we're the top civil rights enforcement agency in the Commonwealth. We're responsible for the protections under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act of 13 million people that make up the Commonwealth. We've been around since 1955, 3 regional offices, 1 in Harrisburg, 1 in Pittsburgh, 1 in Philadelphia. But today, I'm actually, because I see students, I'm always excited when I see students, I'm going to be in the role of that of an instructor. I'm a professor both at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. I would say teaching one of the hardest courses that students say occurs on that campus, which is courses on American racism and social work practice. I'm also a visiting scholar and have been since 2008 at Westchester University with the Frederick Douglass Institute. So I'm going to be in that space because some of the things I'm going to say today, because the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is a nonpartisan agency, I just want to make sure that the views that I'm articulating, like my colleague, is not that of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. But I will share with you that we've received complaints in the space of employment, education, commercial property, fair housing, as well as all of those things in education. So any form of discrimination that happens in the Commonwealth, we encourage people to file a complaint with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. I want to also say that I thought the presentation that you provided really poured into me. So some of the, and when I say pour into me, spiritually, intellectually, but I'm reminded of a quote by Langston Hughes as it relates to democracy. Langston Hughes said, "I swear to the Lord, I still can't see why democracy means everybody but me." That's Langston Hughes. Aristotle put it a different way. He said, if liberty and equality are chief to be found in democracy, they will be best attained when all persons alike share in government to the utmost. For the students in the room, I would encourage you in your spare time, if you have any, to read Dr. Martin Luther King's speech entitled, "Beyond Vietnam, a Time to Break Silence." Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence. King spoke openly about the triple evils of poverty, of racism, of militarism. To understand America, it's a both and. we can stand here today, we can sit here today, and fundamentally and foundationally reach consensus that we are Americans. There's aspects of this democracy that we love. But when King spoke about the triple evils, he also spoke about that the greatest purveyor of violence is my own United States government. This is not Chad Dion Lassiter. Thank you, my colleague, because I'm a call and response, so I see you nodding in affirmation. This is King, a different version of King. And what does King mean when he says that the greatest purveyor of violence is my own United States government? That's Socratic for you all as students and others to kind of think that through. So when we spoke earlier today about preserving peace, absolutely right. Protecting democracy, that's absolutely right. But it's against the backdrop of Anglo-conformity, acculturation, and American exceptionalism. Not all of us see the democracy in the way that we oftentimes say, well, listen, we have to protect the sovereignty of democracy. Another Socratic question, America polices the world. Who polices America? And so the reality then becomes understanding the beauty of America, but also understanding America as an empire. Understanding America as an empire. Understanding America as an empire is difficult for those of us who have been racialized and socialized into the American exceptionalism, which brings me to the work of extremism, white supremacy, and white nationalism that we see in Pennsylvania. Each year, Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League, PA State Police, and others, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, has PA probably in the top 10 of hate groups assembling. And more specifically, those hate groups are white supremacist and white nationalist groups, not an indictment against white individuals. And so when James Carville, Democratic strategist for the Clinton administration, said you have Philadelphia, you have Pittsburgh, and in between you have Kentucky. Joyce Davis and the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission and several of us, we set out about 4 years ago to say, no, you have Philadelphia, you have Pittsburgh, and in between you have peace and justice. You have peace and justice. You have people who have been racialized and socialized, but you have people who fundamentally are fighting for the rights of others. They see the inherent dignity in that Jewish person, in that atheist person, in that agnostic person, in that black person, in that Asian American Pacific Islander person. They're doing the work of being anti-racist within themselves. Not looking at, I'm an ally and I'm an accomplice. My grandmother said, fundamentally, just be a good person. Just be a good person. The golden rule of treating people the way you want to be treated, but also it's that additional golden rule. Treating people the way you were not treated. A lot of us were not treated with dignity. A lot of us were not treated with respect. So I think as we get over to our next panelist, I just wanted to kind of frame some things out around this beloved community framework that we'll talk about. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission had borrowed from the work of Rabbi Abraham Yahshua Heschel, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and countless others. When Mother Teresa said there's joy in transcending self to serve others, that's what we've attempted to do, to fight back against white nationalism, white supremacy. Just a month ago in downtown Harrisburg, there were neo-Nazis that were marching in downtown Harrisburg. In 2024, but that shouldn't be surprising because we saw Charlottesville. The only difference between a neo-Nazi march in downtown Harrisburg that I and my civil rights team responded to was that they came out of a U-Haul truck and they had their faces covered. In Charlottesville, those individuals did not have their faces covered. In Charlottesville, from an identity perspective, those were our doctors, our lawyers, our pediatricians, our Sunday school teachers, and maybe our professors on the campus of maybe the University of Virginia, whether we know it or not. And so this beloved community framework says, let's all work together. Trump supporter, come into the beloved community. Xenophobic, come into the beloved community. Transphobic, come into the beloved community. Whatever you are, come into the beloved community, and let's have race dialogue on the levels of civility, where we see the humanity of one another. We don't always have to agree. The woman that just left, that's a part of trauma. That's a part of trauma. That wasn't about Joyce. That wasn't about her leaning in by saying, I'm a woman and someone's trying to silence me. She didn't say this, but as a scholar, sometimes we go there, right? Render me non-person, non-entity, marginalize me. No, that was a form of trauma that she was going through. And empire would get you into that level of trauma. We don't talk about war trauma, the psychological consequences of war. The vicarious traumatization. Not a post-traumatic stress disorder from war. Post means to be over. My dad, decorated veteran, Vietnam, 2 tours in Vietnam, served this democracy for 26 years. During the summertime, he would knock on doors and ask people, could I shovel your snow? In the wintertime, he would ask people the opposite because he had PTSD. Had a father in the home, but was not there, was a shell of himself. Shell of himself because of the democracy. And so as we frame out this discussion about what are we doing at home, maybe we should be theorizing around a peace industrial complex against the backdrop of a military industrial complex. Maybe we should really be looking at the impact that white rage, white violence, white supremacy has on the democracy and has on the citizens of the Commonwealth. That's why at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we've established ADRs, Alternative Dispute Resolutions. The first one was a PHRC social justice lecture series where we brought in Tim Wise. We followed that up by bringing in Chu Chu Chang. We brought in Melissa Harris Perry. We brought in Eddie Claude. We brought in Anita Hill, the historical Anita Hill. DEI, equal opportunity for all. DEI, we're running from that these days, Joyce. Critical race theory, we're running from that. Students, raise your hand if critical race theory is being taught in any course that you have on this campus other than law school. It's not. So when Moms for Liberties and the others are showing up and they're saying, I don't want critical race theory being taught, it's not being taught K through 12. And so what are we doing here to address extremism? We're looking at being peacemakers in the tradition of the Community Relations Services of the United States Department of Justice. CRS comes out on the heels of the assassination, the unfortunate assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And they were peacemakers going into communities, dealing with the civil unrest, dealing with Moynihan's report that there are 2 Americas, one black, one white, separate and unequal. And at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, that's what we've been called to do, young people and everyone else in this room, is to stand as social justice warriors to address forms of human brokenness. To address forms of human brokenness. All of us in this room have a form of bias. When my black grandmother says she can't take the comb, don't bring her home, meaning the straightening iron. My brother, Harvard graduate, me, graduate from Johnson C. Smith, 2 degrees from the University of Penn. We never looked at white young ladies in our earlier developmental stage because that was socialized from home. You all have been socialized. You all have been racialized. It's convenient to talk about systemic and structural racism, institutional racism, which is prejudice plus power that someone else has. What about if you bring a person on the other side of the color line or gender, how people describe themselves, home to your grandmother? You may find out that your grandmother may be racist, still eat her peach cobbler. Let that sink in. PA is made up of the beauty of individuals in rural, suburban, and urban catchment areas, but not without its challenges. Russell asked me earlier, and I'll finish on this note because I know we have another speaker and then our moderator will come up. Where are we seeing the rates of housing discrimination, employment, public accommodations, commercial property, education, and multiple sectors? I would encourage you to look on our website, to look at our annual report. We have a lot of racism, systemic and structural, in Pennsylvania. You look at the data as it relates to Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, it mirrors the same. White rural rage is real in PA. The challenges in PA are real, but there are a lot of people who are also standing up to systemic and structural racism. There are a lot of people fighting for pathways and opportunities to avoid what James Baldwin spoke about, which is the fire next time. Thank you.
say thank you for sharing that, because that is truly a huge issue for our country. And he's at the forefront of having to deal with racism, with extremism that is impacting not only the U.S. but the world, I think. So we've turned to the Dean to give us our solution. Dean Venabus is going to tell us how artificial intelligence is going to solve it all, right?
So hard to follow that. That's really good. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and I know I understand I'm the only one between you and lunch, so I'll try to be somewhat brief. I don't have a presentation, PowerPoint, but I want to talk about, we have shared a lot of things about conflict resolution, peacemaking. To me, it is absolutely not a battle to be won, but it is a puzzle to be resolved. And I 100% actually agree with things that our guest, who unfortunately left, shared, which is the importance of learning the skills to solve conflict, right? And especially for the youth, right? What are the programs? Where are we teaching conflict resolution, right? So to me, when we talk about peacemaking or even global peacemaking, it is a process of resolving conflict, of preventing violence, of learning, how to promote harmonious relations between nations, between communities, between diverse groups worldwide. It involves diplomatic negotiations. It involves conflict resolution, which we'll talk more about, mediation, and just learning how to establish lasting agreement that can foster peace, it can foster stability. We have heard a lot about what's stopping us from having or from achieving peace. And everyone, I think we just heard the perspective of what are the barriers to peace. And it makes me wonder, from which perspective are those barriers that we just heard today? When we're talking about global peacemaking, those are barriers from one lens. Maybe if you ask somebody else from a different side of the world, they may have different reasons or different perspective. That's why when I look at when I think about conflict and peacemaking, I think of it as it's a puzzle that constitutes so many pieces of perspectives, of needs, of concerns. And we need to understand them very well in order for us to get to the root cause of those conflicts. If we don't know what those root causes are, it's really hard to achieve peace. Now we're talking about AI and how generative AI can help. We heard from our keynote speaker talking briefly about touching on artificial intelligence and how it can be used in war, right? And I think we're going to see that a lot. I think I saw research recently that said in 2020, maybe half of the military will be robotic to prevent using people's lives in some risky areas. We heard about drones that are AI, like powered AI, where they can just go and be, part of the war and doing that. I'm going to focus on generative AI in the sense of how it can help in a global peacemaking. There are so many examples, there are so many things out there, but I'm going to list 6 briefly because I know you're hungry. So the first one I'm going to talk about, which our guest mentioned it briefly, which is the education piece. Generative AI can be used to generate educational content for peacemaking. It can create a customized peace education programs tailored to different regions, that have different culture. It can create educational materials that teach conflict resolution skills to youth, helping to prevent future violence. And those kind of resources can rapidly be adapted and deployed to local context, empowering communities with the tools needed to build and maintain peace. The example number 2 is that generative AI can be used for real-time translation. It can be used to help create culturally sensitive dialogue script in multiple languages, facilitating reconciliation between groups, between nations, between communities, ensuring that communication respects cultural nuances and avoid triggering historical traumas. Generative AI can be used to simulate potential outcomes of various peace negotiation strategies by analyzing historical data, cultural context, and cultural political dynamics. For example, AI can model different types of peace proposals, helping negotiators to choose the most effective approach. The benefits, of course, will help diplomats and peacemakers to foresee potential challenges and outcomes, enabling more informed decisions in real-time negotiation. Generative AI can be used to support humanitarian efforts. It can be used to generate logistics plans from humanitarian aid distributions, security risks, and generative AI can be used to monitor data from multiple sources, from social media, from news, from satellite images. And shared history of mutual respect between communities. And these campaigns can change the public perceptions. It can reduce hostility and can foster a culture of peace in divided societies. So while I'm sharing all these 6 examples, and I'm sure there are so many of how generative AI can be used to promote global peacemaking, but I do want to say it cannot replace human. Because conflict is complicated, right? It requires empathy. It requires compassion. It requires understanding of cultures, values. While generative AI can be very helpful in so many ways because it is super intelligent. It is more intelligent than any human brain in this room. But yet, it is still not able to mimic things that are only human, such as empathy, right? They still can't do that yet. They still cannot be compassionate and understand what it's like to be on the other side. Try to understand your values, right? And in order for us to get to that peace making, we need human. We need people in the conversations to be able to understand the cause of that particular conflict, because it can get muddy. It's not simple. It's not just, it's political or it's economic or it's religion. It could be multiple of many things. And if we can't communicate effectively in a way that it's more human, it's very hard to achieve peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. Benavasek gave us hope, actually, that we have a tool. I mean, I keep wondering, is anybody put the Israeli-Palestinian issue inside AI and say, can you figure this out? I mean, really, at least to give some light. But anyway, let's open it up now to your questions. We've covered a lot of territory here. We've covered from the Middle East, all the issues there. We've got climate change. We've got homegrown issues, right? And we've got perhaps a path toward peace if we use artificial intelligence. Any questions for any of our speakers? Yes, Russell.
Earlier we heard from the Colonel that weakness invites aggression. And then in the presentation from Mr. Commins here, we talked about the Israeli-Palestinian situation. Clearly there's an imbalance there in terms of power on one side, considerably less on the other side. I'm just curious, how might we right that balance? And might that do something to bring about a serious attempt to bring about a two-state solution or some type of lasting solution? Because at the moment, don't we seem to have one side? What is the reason why it would seriously enter into negotiations to bring about some kind of lasting detente?
Dr. Commins, I think he's directing that.
I don't look at it in strategic terms. Obviously, there is a tremendous power imbalance between Israel and the Palestinians. But I look at the behavior. It looks to me two deeply traumatized populations, and both of them acting out of trauma. And there's this, fear in Israel of annihilation rooted in the Holocaust experience. And so any Palestinian attack on an Israeli is an act by Nazis. Like I remember in 1982, when Israel had invaded Lebanon and surrounded Beirut, not out of a war against Lebanese, they said, but a war against the Palestine Liberation Organization. And the Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, told President Reagan, I feel like I have Hitler surrounded in his bunker. All right? And, it's typical to respond to Hezbollah and Hamas as Islamo-fascists. There's this demonization of the other that I think drives a lot of behavior. Now, if there were an Arab power able to push back against Israel, would that change Israel's strategic calculus? It's impossible to say. It's never existed. Never existed. So, I don't know. What would remedy the power imbalance? Of course, American support for Israel doesn't change that. It accentuates the power imbalance between Israel and the Palestinians. So, I don't have a scenario in mind where that's altered. I don't. Just to open this scenario up among the people. I'm not an Arab Israeli specialist in my Middle East studies. I focus on Saudi Arabia, modern Islamic thought. But among people who do specialize on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they say the two-state solution is dead. And they don't think there is a two-state solution that is ever going to be possible, and they see it evolving to one political unit between the river and the sea, to borrow that slogan, and the political future is eventually going to turn into one for equal rights. Now, I have no idea if they're right or not. I have no idea. But just to sort of open it up, that the people in my field don't think the two-state solution is possible, let alone desirable.
Yes, Sam.
So a lot was brought up about conflicts and issues going abroad, right? And actually something Dr. Lassiter got me thinking about is there are people in this country who are very impoverished, who feel like their civil rights are being taken away. So how do you then say to somebody like that, I'm going to take resources that could be going to fix your community and your home and give it abroad? How can you get people to care about what's going abroad when their homes are being either broken down for a highway or their farms are being taken away for a warehouse? How do you get people like that to care about what's going on abroad?
Chad, you want to take that one? Because it really does get to whether people understand that democracy, everything is very much connected to the globe.
Yeah, one I think is a deeply profound question. And there's not a peculiar arrogance that exists in me to say I have an answer to it. But we're in the framework of a beloved community, and I would say to that question, what do others think we should do? So for instance, when you look at the historical budget that was passed for educational equity between Governor Josh Shapiro and Secretary Dr. Khalid Mumin, leveling the playing field for the first time historically from the PA Supreme Court that simply said, we need to make sure that all districts are funded the same. There were some individuals that felt that that shouldn't have occurred. That you're taking money from a more kind of well-to-do school district and you're putting it into a district that some of us who are in those spaces know that it would be advantageous to do so. But once again, I don't know how you reach that consensus to simply say what King tried to do when he looked at this global garment of destiny, that we're all intertwined together, that we're all part of this kaleidoscope that makes up this democracy. And so you have individuals who, so for instance, you have the oligarchs and the plutocrats, right? You have the wealthy on Wall Street, and then you have individuals who are in this permanent underclass and the faces of the bottom of the well that might not ever come out. How do we simply say, let's take this? I think we mentioned earlier, Jeff Bezos goes to space. I think he took Michael Strahan with him, former NFL player and sports commentator. Nobody's saying there's anything wrong with that, but Bezos also gave $100 million to Van Jones. Have we heard where Van Jones is putting that money? Are we even in the space to say where Van Jones should put that money? So I think that for you all as college students, the aid that is going to Ukraine, the aid that is going to Israel, you all as students, when we're looking at college loans, when we're looking at loan repayment, you can look at that. It's not an either or, it comes to both ends. So once again, I think it's a profound question. If I had the answer to that, it's almost like using $6 to get a scratch off and getting $60 million.
Well, I want to bring Colonel Chase. I know you thought the spotlight would offer you, but it's back on you. I mean, think about it. Isn't that the battle that you're fighting to help Americans understand that you can't really have a safe America or a stable democracy without being careful about protecting what's out there? And we're connected even to Ukraine.
Yeah. As I talked about before, a strong domestic economy, domestic population, unity, that is absolutely essential to projecting strength. To the history, I would simply point to, we have attempted to pull back into isolationism before, and the result is never good. The world will come back to bother us, and it will do so more now than it ever has in the past, because technology expands the scope and reach of our adversaries. The ability of individuals to create chaos in the world is amplified by things like AI, bioengineering. These are threats. Now, I'm not advocating that we should be the world policeman. That is a decision for the people of America to make, and they have to vote to make those decisions. It's ultimately about policy. I am simply highlighting some of the risks that come along from with trying to withdraw from the world. You may be done with war, but war is not done with you.
Yeah, great point.
Yes, but it's not.
A short comment. Both Colonel Metcalf and Dr. David made references to Iran and policies that they have around the region. My view is this, that if the government of Iran was not changed and they did not have brought Khomeini into power, we wouldn't have all these things going on. So what comes around goes around, or vice versa. Okay, the Iranian population of Iran, most of them are very suppressed. Economy is minus so many zeros that people are really in a very deep trouble. But because of most of the money that they have, that government has, goes into the military, and then they put their hands in other pockets, in other parts of the region. So sometimes, as you refer to the empire, has to be very careful with what they do around the world, because sometimes comes and bites you in the bad places.
Very true. Yes.
Could I just point something out?
Please go ahead.
So, the Iranian Revolution in 1978-79 had multiple causes, but the anti-American thrust of it does go back to an effort by the United States to, quote, keep Iran from going communist, when the Central Intelligence Agency overthrew an elected government and installed, reinforced authoritarian monarchy. The elected government was being punished for nationalizing the British-owned oil company, and it was starved for funds. The starvation for funds actually destabilized that government. Once that government was overthrown, the Mossadegh government was overthrown, the Eisenhower administration provided $1 billion in economic and military aid. in the next 8 years. So Iranians never forgot that. And it is, of course, Americans say, well, that's ancient history, right? But for Iran, they had an elected democratic government, they had a parliament, and who destroyed it?
Yeah.
So when they hear about the United States protecting democracy, they think it's, just a big lie. Just to put another perspective on it.
And what's so sad is that most Americans don't know that.
They don't know that.
They
Yes.
do not know it, right?
Yeah, it's so common. This $1 billion actually went for $100 met with the sister of the Shah. They made a deal. It was so easily was done.
Yeah.
And that would have been a very, very refreshing change because some good people, they were running the country at that.
Yeah.
And look what they have now.
Right.
And we didn't even get into what about Iran's nuclear
Right.
nuclear program? That wasn't even up there,
Right.
but it's a real possibility, right? Any other? Yes, Ella, and then
Yeah. I have a question for Professor Dion Lassiter about constructing the beloved community. I'm seeing a rise in a new type of identity conflict. I think these identities have existed before, but I'm seeing a real, not to the degree of today. And that's, I'm referring to political identities between Republicans and Democrats. I'm seeing not simply polarization, but I'm seeing this real kind of like, we don't want to sit in the same room, we don't want to share space, we don't want to share government. There's a real hostility that I have not seen before. And so if we kind of add those to this eclectic mix of our beloved community, how do we move forward? This gets to the heart of democracy, but also the heart of making peace at home.
Yeah. You're going to have some that are going to be active participants and some that are going to just push back. So for instance, we've set out to create a beloved community tour where I and my civil rights team, we go to 67 counties. We've been to 32 counties. We do a series of presentations, but as important, or in addition to doing the presentation, we're listening to the community, we're learning from the community. So for instance, we were up in Westmoreland County. Only 5 people showed. 5 people showed, but that energy felt like 500 people. And they were talking about white nationalism in their community. We were in Cambria County just last Monday. We're up there, there's about 40 or so people that showed. Their issue wasn't white supremacy. It was the lack of affordable housing. There were some challenges with education. They also shared in conjunction with the Blair community, Blair County NAACP, some of the challenges that are happening within the prison system. We were up in Pottsville. Pottsville informed us that we need to have race dialogue in rural barbershops because in the heart of Pottsville, downtown, there is a Hispanic barber by the name of Angel. And for me, I'm like, what is Angel doing in Pottsville? Leaving out of Pottsville, some of you may know Senator Argle. I've never met Senator Argle, but leaving out of Pottsville, he's a Republican senator in PA, and there's a Trump sign that's over his office. And I'm here to say, this is Chad's views. That's okay. Because what I learned from meeting with his constituent outreach director is that he's on the front lines of addressing anti-Semitism. He's on the front lines of doing some stuff around education. So guess what? We're getting a meeting with him. So my point is that there are some communities that are inviting. There are some communities where we're learning a lot just with our framework. Lewisburg. I've never been to Lewisburg. We went there. Bucknell University is there. 40 or maybe 50 people showed up, but what resonated the most was the community felt like they were heard. So the beloved community, we're already doing it. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, a masjid, a church, a synagogue, those are beloved communities, here on campus, whether it's a Republican club, the Glee Club, sports kind of, milieus. We're just using this framework. I think we also have to be prepared for the fact that some people don't want to have race dialogue. And some people don't want to have conversations. And some people are the sum of how they view the world, how they view whatever their political ideology is. And so we have to be able to sit with that as well. I'm not saying that it's touchy-feely, tiptoe through the tulips, kumbaya, we shall overcome. I've been to some places that are not inviting. That's why we've established a no hate in our state town hall. And on one particular occasion when we did this, the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan from Hershey showed up. And I said, let him speak. And people in the Crispus Attucks Center, they murmured. And it wasn't because of amendment rights. I truly saw that individual through the lens of humanity. That's a higher level of humanity. I'll end with this part to your question. We did a PHRC social justice lecture series at Lebanon Valley College. Evening conversation between Dr. Bernice King and myself, Coretta Scott King's daughter and Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter. The reason why I went with Coretta Scott King first is because she was the architect of everything that was poured into Dr. Martin Luther King at that point in time. I don't believe you get a Martin Luther King Jr. without the Black church, without his family, and without his wife. Yeah. And she stated that at one particular point in time, Professor, that she hated all white people, and white men in particular, given the levels of trauma what happened to her dad. But she had to work through that. And so I just come out of a tradition that it's that rugged cross of that Palestinian Jew, Yeshua, that I see things and I have to have my humanity go to a higher level to recognize that even with my human brokenness, even with my forms of bigotry that I've worked on, my forms of discriminatory thought and process that I've worked on, that we just have to continue to build the beloved community within ourselves. How can Dion Lassiter work on not being a person that engages in toxic masculinity? That doesn't prejudge a particular person. It's hard when you have to deal with yourself. It's hard when you have to deal with those things that you have thought that you've compartmentalized, but they're still there. And so that's the way we do it at the PHRC. We have some other things that I can share with you. Love to keep the dialogue going, but I think that we invite people into the beloved community, knowing that sometimes, or more often than not, they're not going to want to be there to bring about peace. So you just simply say, if you have an issue with a Jewish person, a Muslim person, anyone in a protected category, we're asking you to not engage in a form of violence. That's King and others' mantra of nonviolence. And still, the 3 W's. Some will, some won't, and we have to be able to live with, so what?
So Chad and I will be, at the Peace and Justice, he mentioned this, Peace and Justice in PA Forum, October 9th at Central Penn College, where he will be talking about, giving us up to date on where things stand in Pennsylvania with regard to battling extremism, and we'll be honoring once again people who are working hard to create that beloved community. So, final question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to come back behind all of these things, but again, not a German exchange student, just happen to be sitting there. Please don't be. I'm just a parent of a volunteer. But I don't really have a question. I'm just listening to all of these views and all of this, experience coming out from this panel and Chase Metcalf here. It's just so eye-opening. I'm just sad that this is not at a larger forum. I actually just drove in here to be
our intern this summer, Hamza.
Yes. Yeah. I actually drew the short straw between me and my wife, and now I'm actually fortunate to be amongst such illumination. The one dichotomy that kind of caught me was that Chase Metcalf says that we need to kind of up the production in our 115 shells, right? 115-inch house shells, 115s. And I was thinking, I looked it up, like the amount of carbon footprint that leaves out, from going to 3,000 to 9,000 to 450,000 a month. And then I wonder what goes on the heart of Dr. Numbers just tear apart, So, and I think about what Dr. Commins said about, he is the first person I've seen who actually called it an Israeli Palestine. I just hear people calling it an Israel-Hamas conflict, an Israel-Hamas. So because the humanization of the Palestinian people has been lost, in the conversation. The Americans don't think about that, right? And
some Americans do.
I'm an American too, right? Obviously, again, don't get confused. That's how America was built, right? I not look as American as some others out here, but I'm as American as all of you guys sitting in here. And I am a software professional, so Dr. Najeeba's generative AI solution is a possibility very close in the near future. So, it's just it's just fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Joyce.
Well, thank you for being here. Thanks to all of you. We're now going to thank our panel. And we're going to enjoy lunch. Please, help yourself. It's wonderful what's been provided, and then we will return. We have a few housekeeping things to talk about during your lunch, and then we will have our closing keynote. So, thank you again.
Joyce. I should finish this first.
The groundbreaking report, Citizen and Politics, A View from Main Street, the first national study to uncover that Americans did not feel apathetic about politics, but instead held a deep sense of anger and disconnection. Over the past 30 years, he has innovated and developed a new philosophy and practice of how communities can solve shared problems, create a culture of shared responsibility, and deepen people's civic faith. The Harwood practice of turning outward has spread to all 50 U.S. states and is being used in 40 countries. Our guest has invested his career in revitalizing the nation's hardest hit communities, transforming the world's largest organizations, and reconnecting institutions like newsrooms and schools to society. In Newtown, Connecticut, after the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School, he led the process for the community to collectively decide the fate of the school building. He is an inspiring, sought-after speaker who regularly keynotes major conferences and events. He appears regularly on major media outlets. He's written 4 books, some of which we do have for sale today as you exit on our registration table. I very much encourage you to peruse them. And he's also written scores of articles and numerous groundbreaking reports. He's also written numerous studies and articles that have appeared on national media, including MSNBC, NPR, CNN's Inside Politics, The NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, Special Report with Brit Hume, and C-SPAN. Recently, he became a regular contributor to The Christian Citizen, a publication which provides thought on issues of justice, mercy, and faith. So please help me welcome through the World Affairs Council to our Peace Symposium, Mr. Rich Harwood.
Thanks. Great to be here. Great to be on campus. Great to be in E-Town. Heard part of the last conversation that you had, and I know part of the concerns that were expressed is if we're going to be strong in the world, how do we be strong at home, right? And I think it's Ellen asked the question at the end about how we do that. So I want to talk for a few minutes about where we are as a country, what I think it's going to take to move us forward, and what each of our roles is in doing that. Is that okay? All right. I've been traveling all over the country, and wherever I go and whomever I speak with, regardless of who they vote for, I hear the same thing, that we can do better and that we can be better. We can do better and be better as individuals. We can do better and be better in our communities. And we can do better as a nation. And, I'm on this national campaign. Jesse didn't mention this, but I'm on this national campaign speaking now. People are always asking me, am I running for office? And I'm not running for office. Nice. But you can donate. But we have launched a national civic campaign because we think that we don't need more divisive politics in this country. I think what we need is a new civic path to get us on a new road forward, a civic path that begins in our local communities like E-Town and Reading, where I just was, and Philly, where I was the night before. A civic path where we can come together in our local communities and figure out, amid our real differences, and there are real differences, what we can agree on, and how we can get in motion, and how we can get moving, and how we can start to take action, so that we can not only make progress in this country, but I believe one of the key issues we face today is how do we restore our belief in ourselves and in one another that we actually can get together and get things done again as Americans, not as Republicans, not as Democrats, not as independents, but as Americans, And so I think that's the biggest challenge we face. If we want to be strong abroad, we need to be strong at home. If we want to be strong at home, we need a new civic path. It's not going to happen through politics. We all know that, right? So let me talk about where we are and then what this civic path might look like for us. I work with folks all across the country. As Jesse said, we're working in all 50 states and about 40 countries. And wherever I went after, we were just talking about COVID and students, wherever I went and talked to folks that we were working with after COVID, there was this sense of relief that COVID had eased, right? We all had this sense that things had eased, except all the folks that I was working with told me how worn out and dead tired they were. I don't know if you all felt that. And as they looked up, they realized their work wasn't easing or getting easier. It was just beginning and getting harder, right? Inequities and disparities in this country didn't diminish. They grew during that time. We went from a lack of trust in this country to mistrust, which is a fundamentally different thing to try to solve. There is a short supply of hope in our country. And if any of us think this all happened from COVID, we all know I've been tracking this for 40 years now. This all began many, many years ago. COVID accelerated and deepened it. We are separating and segregating as a country and from one another at a faster pace than ever before. Think about it. We make judgments about each other based on the baseball hat we wear. We make judgments about each other based on the slogan on our T-shirt. We make judgments about each other based on the bumper sticker on the back of our car. In some communities where I'm working, we make judgments based on where we go to church on Wednesday night and Sunday morning, right? We make judgments. But I ask, what do we know about each other? Not a heck of a lot. We don't know about our beliefs, our values, what we care about, what matters to us in our daily lives. We don't know about our lived experiences. We have a national media and political apparatus in this country that I've come to believe, and Americans tell me every day, that are intentionally manufacturing and stoking division in this country. You got to ask why. Why? Is it for the public good? Is it for our common good? Is it for somehow to improve the lives of folks in this town? No, it's to gain votes. It's to win at any cost. It's to gain viewers, right? To gain eyeballs on social media. And what Americans tell me is that we can't tell who to believe and who not to believe anymore. We can't tell what's fiction and what's real. We can't tell which end is up sometimes. People use the word confused. I'm disoriented. I don't know what's happening. I can't make sense of things. And as many of you know, one of the most important things as a human being is to gain coherence about what's happening around you, to make sense of what's happening around you. When you can't, we're in trouble. That's where we are today. So what the reaction is a natural human reaction. Now, a lot of political scientists, are there any political scientists in the room? Good, I can say whatever I want. With one exception, just close your ears. A lot of researchers and others would tell you that we're polarized, and I want to come back to that in a minute. There's a report out there called Civic Virus that sort of says it's a wrong diagnosis. I actually think there's something more profound happening in the country, potentially more dangerous, but here's the good news, it's more actionable. It's not polarization. What Americans tell us is we're engaged in fight or flight, which is a natural human reaction to anxiety, to stress, to feeling confused, to being disoriented, to not knowing what's real or fake. We're in fight or flight. Obviously, if you study psychology, there's a few other, like freeze and other things. But essentially, it's fight or flight. Those who are fleeing are basically looking at our public square and saying, it's too scary to go in there. It's too risky to go in there. It's too noisy to go in there. It's too acrimonious and divisive to go in there. So they're throwing up their hands and they're walking away and retreating. Here's the thing. If you think they don't care, that's what's actually happening is they care deeply, but they don't see a way to engage. The fight is those folks who have come out swinging. They're mimicking politics. We're seeing it in every community we're working in across the country. Right? They have now imported politics from the national scene, and they're playing it out locally. And we have a weaponization of agendas, weaponization of fundraising. We have I'm being followed around Owensboro, Kentucky by a group called Citizens for Decency because they don't like the work that's going on there, right? It's happening everywhere, this fight or flight. It's a natural human response to anxiety and stress and not feeling like you have a voice. The result of this is a dangerous vacuum in our society. It's a dangerous vacuum in our society, where the loudest and most divisive voices are taking over our public square, and where people of goodwill and good faith are moving to the edges of public life. A lot of the folks I work with in communities, right, they're moving to the edges because they don't want to have to deal with all these controversial issues. They don't want to have to keep sticking their neck out and getting cut down. They don't want to have to deal with these seemingly intractable issues that they can't get movement on. They don't want to have to deal with folks who say they want to collaborate, but who have no business really wanting to work together. They just want to say they're working together. So they've moved to the edges. And in that vacuum has come the loudest and most divisive voices. So here's the choice we face as a country, and I think each of us here face as citizens of this country. We can choose to retreat and surrender the public square to the loudest and most divisive voices. And given your conversation this morning, that will make us more unstable abroad, and it will make us more unstable here at home. Or we can come back into the public square. We can come back into the public square and reclaim it. I think our work today as Americans is to come back into the public square and reclaim it. Now, not too long ago, about a year ago, I was in Selma, Alabama, at the Tabernacle Baptist Church. It's the same church where Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and other civil rights leaders in the basement helped to plan parts of the civil rights movement in the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I was there to meet with the local NAACP in the basement, same place where they planned the civil rights, parts of the civil rights movement. And as I was sitting there talking about how we could work together to rejuvenate Selma, there's an older black gentleman sitting directly across from me, and after about 90 minutes of a conversation, he stopped the conversation, and he looked directly across at me, and he said 3 words which I will never forget. He said, "Will anything change? Will anything change?" Just weeks after that, I was 800 miles directly due north of Selma in southwest Michigan with an almost all-white group of community leaders. And after about 90 minutes of working with them about how we could work together to move southwest Michigan forward, a young white woman sitting in the front of the room raised her hands and said 4 words, which I also will never forget. She said, "Am I strong enough? Am I strong enough? Am I strong enough to bring about the change we need in southwest Michigan and in this country?" I happen to believe that things can change, and I happen to believe that as Americans, we are strong. I say that not because I've read it in a book, not because I've written books, but because of what I've witnessed across the country. So I just want to tell you 3 quick stories about what I've seen, and then tell you about how I think we can learn from them to move forward. You still with me? Mm-hmm. You sure? Yeah. I can stop. All right. I was just in Reading, Pennsylvania, an hour from here. We've been working there for 3 years. And as you know, about 10, 12 years ago, Reading was declared the poorest community in all of America. It was once predominantly white, it is now nearly 70% Latino. And at the height of the culture wars in this country, right? This is about Armageddon, right? And division. At the height of culture wars in this country around education issues, you remember those? They're still happening, right? Book banning, debates over DEI and critical race theory, the recall of school board members, the school superintendents being summarily fired. I was in Sarasota County where the school superintendent was fired right before I gave a speech on education. At the very moment that we were at the height of that culture war, we were asked to work with the community to develop a community-led, community-driven education agenda to help this community move forward. Everyone told us it would never happen. Everyone told us it wouldn't be possible, that education was too divisive an issue, that the culture wars were too heated up. And yet, as we worked with the community, they actually produced an agenda, a 9-point education agenda, based on what matters to them, not on the politics of the day. And by creating that 9-point agenda, they formed teams, cross-sector teams from folks across the country to work on 3 of those 9-point agenda items: English as a second language, early childhood education, and after-school and out-of-school activity. They are producing now transformational change on each of those areas in that community. And it's happened in just 2 years. Education doesn't need to divide us. It can bring us together if we're willing to have the right conversation and get moving together in the right ways on a new civic path. Not too long ago, I asked the folks in Reading, what are you creating together? What are you creating together? I loved their answer. I wasn't expecting it. They didn't tell me about the new programs they were creating. They didn't tell me about their new initiatives. They didn't tell me about the hundreds of thousands, even millions of new dollars they've raised through this work, and they have. What they told me was they said, we're creating a new, have you ever been to Reading? Oh, yeah. Okay. What they told me is that they're creating a new pride in Reading. What they told me is that they're creating new trust in Reading. What they told me is they've created new norms of how they get things done in Reading. What they told me is they had a history of getting together and having all sorts of conversations, but never working together. You know what I mean? And now they're actually working together and having the hard conversations that they need to have. When we first started working there was no sense of shared purpose. Now they're saying within the community there's a growing sense of shared purpose emerging in the community. You just mentioned narratives before. There was a negative ingrained narrative in this community that Reading was a place to flee. Now they're creating a new narrative. At the end, a gentleman raised his hand and he said, I've been following this work for 18 months. I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in it. And now after listening to the folks in this room, I'm bought in and I'm going to start working on it. A woman raised her hand and said, the narrative in this town was once you flee it. Right? Reading's called the donut hole in Berks County. Right? Most people in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania think it's just a left out, left behind community that's never going to get back up on its feet. That's going to fall victim to culture wars. But I actually think Reading's one of the most successful communities in America right now. And what this woman said to me was, we've now created a new narrative where people want to come back to Reading, where people believe it's a good place to raise their kids. They still have challenges, but it's moving in the right direction. It can be done. We can overcome the culture wars. We can overcome division. We can overcome mistrust, but we got to get on a new civic path. The second story I want to tell you about real quickly is about Newtown, Connecticut. You all remember, or most of you probably remember, December 2012, a young gunman walked into Sandy Hook Elementary School. You remember that? Massacred 20 first graders and 6 adults. 5 weeks after the massacre, I got a call from the mayor asking me if I would come up to Newtown and design and lead a process by which the community decided what to do with the school building. It was a crime scene. It was a crime scene. First I said no. I didn't know, I had so many personal doubts about leading something like this. There was no blueprint for it. But then I thought, if you're called forward to do something, and you do have the experience to do it, you have a responsibility to step forward. So I did. I'd step forward. And what I came to understand real quickly was this was not about a school building at all. It was whether or not a community could pivot from trauma and despair to healing and hope. This was their first public act to do so. The mayor had convened a task force of 28 elected officials from 4 different governing boards. They despised each other. They didn't like each other. It was a recipe for political division. Most people in the community did not believe we should be having this conversation yet. They wanted to put it off for a year or two because they were too traumatized. They were too traumatized. And the community was divided about what to do about this school. Right? So again, a different form of division, of trauma, of mistrust. Every meeting we held was in a room like this, a city council chamber, in public. So CNN, CBS News, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times covered every step that we took because it was always a public meeting. It was always a public meeting. After months of leading this process, I was about to go back up to Newtown for what we thought would be a decision about what to do. I got a call from the mayor's office that morning, and they said, have you seen the Wall Street Journal? I said, no. They said, well, go find it. There's a lead article where 30 school teachers from Sandy Hook Elementary School released a public letter saying that under no condition would they go back to the school. Under no condition. So I went back up to Newtown that afternoon to lead this meeting. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of townspeople packed in this room. There were scores of television cameras and all the journalists sort of click-clacking on their laptops, getting ready for us to make a decision. At that moment, I went to the center of the room and I said to folks, we're going to clear the room, all the townspeople, all the news media. And so they left and we brought the 30 teachers in. And for the next hour and a half to 2 hours, I heard the most horrific stories that I've ever heard in my life about what happened in that school while those 20 first graders and 6 adults were gunned down, and what teachers did to protect the students in their room. I won't take you through all those stories today. When we came back into the room, I announced that tonight was not the night for a decision. The task force itself was beside itself and confused. and emotionally distraught. And so we talked for a bit longer, we adjourned, and we reconvened in 2 weeks to make a decision. In that meeting, 2 weeks later, we'd often started meetings at 7 o'clock at night. It was now midnight, and the task force was gridlocked. It was a third, and a third. And it was getting a little heated. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And as we were working, I was taking them back to first principles about why are we here? What are we really trying to achieve? What's our purpose? And as we did that, there was a gentleman on the task force, I'll never forget him. He was sitting, sir, directly where you are. And he raised his hand and he said, you know, we can either remain gridlocked or we're going to have to get some movement here. So if some of you on the other side are willing to meet me halfway, I'll meet you halfway and we'll figure out how we can come up with a solution. And so for the next couple hours, we worked through that. It was hard. It was emotional. People were crying. It was a tough decision for the community. At the end, when we took a vote, we only took one vote. It was at the end because we needed to. We were a public body. It wasn't 51%, 49%. It wasn't 75%, 25%. It was a unanimous decision. A unanimous decision. Just 2 hours earlier, we were gridlocked. And you have to ask why. For me, what's the moral of this story? What am I hoping you'll take away today from this story? And for me, given where America is today, where our country is today, where our people are today, for me, the lesson is this. We have gotten real practice at saying no. We have gotten real practice at explaining our grievances and articulating our grievances. We've gotten real good about putting roadblocks up and obstacles up. I think we've forgotten how to say yes. I think we've forgotten how to say yes. That night with folks there in the most inexplicable, horrific situation one could ever imagine, can you imagine? They found the wherewithal and the courage and the wisdom to step forward and say, I'm going to have to say yes to something. I'm not going to like all of it, but I'm going to say yes to something. They stepped forward and said, I'm going to have to work with people who I disagree with, and we're going to have to find some level of agreement so we can move forward. They stepped forward and said, there are people in this room who I really don't like. And they said, yes, we don't have to like each other all the time in order to get something done together, right? They said yes. I think as Americans, we need to learn how to say yes more often, which leads me to my last story that I just want to mention before getting into a couple of other points. I was just in Selma again a couple weeks ago, and I was asked to keynote the NAACP annual banquet. I was the only white person in the room. And as I was in Selma, I spent a number of days there. I kept thinking about that community. Have you ever been to Selma? It's an interesting town. I kept thinking my hotel was right at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You know, the bridge, the march. And so many Americans go to Selma to make an annual pilgrimage. And then they leave. They leave. And they don't leave a whole lot behind. They leave. Other people go to Selma and they look around and they see dilapidated buildings, open storefronts, empty storefronts, potholes in pretty much every road you can imagine, dilapidated homes that haven't been torn down, that are falling down, in disrepair. And as I was in Selma, I kept asking myself, what is it that we see? Do we just see the bridge? Or do we just see these dilapidated buildings? And as you know, Selma has a history of division. Selma has a history of racism. It's still there. Selma has a history of poverty. It's still there and growing. Selma has a history of people not working together. I'm telling you what they told me, not what I'm observing. This is what they told me. So again, this is another example of where we are divided as a country and where we're not moving forward. It's also an example of what we're willing to see and not see. Because I think a lot of folks look at Selma and they just see the bridge. I think a lot of other folks look at Selma and they just see the empty storefronts and the divisions. I look at Selma and I see the people. I see the people. And here's what I've learned about the people over working with Selma over the course of a year. There is a fighting spirit in this town. There is a beauty of people's affection for this community. There are people moving back to Selma to make it better. There are people who really want to work together to move this town forward. And I think if we as Americans want to move our country forward, if we want to be stronger abroad by being stronger at home, I think we have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to see? Are we willing to see people and their fighting spirit and tapping into that in order to move forward? Or are we just going to see a bridge or buildings in disrepair? That's what the question was in Reading. That's the question in Flint, Michigan, where I've worked. Same question in Youngstown, Ohio, where I've worked. Same question in the Delta of Mississippi, where I've worked. It's the same question in Australia, where I've worked. It's the same question that they just asked me from folks from Israel. What are we going to see? And what are we going to tap into? It's interesting. This campaign that we're running, we've been to some really interesting places. You know, I used to run campaigns. I think Jesse mentioned this. Last when I was a young aide, I was 23 years old, I was an aide to a presidential candidate. And when we ran campaigns, much like today, the whole business is to win. Right? You don't want to be on a losing campaign. So you want to get 51%, and what you do is you go to your strongholds. So if you're a Democrat, you go to blue areas. If you're a Republican, you go to red areas. And then you go to those slivers of undecided voters if you can pick them off. That's what the whole presidential race right now is all about. Just watch where they're going. It's interesting. This campaign we're running, we've been invited to every type of place you could possibly imagine. I was just in Matt Gaetz's congressional, you know who Matt Gaetz is? I was just invited to Matt Gaetz's congressional district in Pensacola. They've banned more books there than anywhere else in America. We were invited there. Okay? We were invited to Jim Jordan's congressional district. We're working in 2 counties there in Ohio. Jim Jordan's the co-founder of the Freedom Caucus. I was just in Colorado in Lauren Boebert's district. Do I need to tell you who she is? Lauren Boebert's district, right? Deep red areas. We've been invited to Flint, Michigan, to Jackson, Mississippi, to Fresno, California. I was just in Philly, as I mentioned. We've been to Stamford, Connecticut, to Fort Collins, Colorado, which is purple. I'm going out to California next week. Then I'm going on a swing to Kentucky. Then I'm going back to Ohio and Florida. We're the only national campaigns that have been invited to every part of the political spectrum. And you have to ask yourself the question, why? It's not because they like me, though one would hope that's the case. I think it's because it's a reflection of the hunger in our country for a new path forward. I think it's a reflection, you know, Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? I think it's a reflection that people want something better, that people want a voice. Is it Sam? That Sam said earlier that his generation wants a voice. They want to be connected to something larger. They're the next part of our leaders. He's the next probably congressman or governor or someplace. And so people are looking for a sense of agency, a belief that we can make a difference. We're looking for an authentic sense of hope, not a false bill of goods, right? That's why I think this campaign was invited to all these different places. In Pensacola, in Matt Gaetz's district, people told me, I am so sick of the culture wars. In Jordan's district, where we're doing deep work, people said, we're finally dealing with things that matter to us and not the culture wars. Think about it, in Jim Jordan's district. So what can we do moving forward? You still with me? What can we do? So I want to talk about 4 basic things I think we need to do. It's more complicated than this, but these just give you an idea of the nature of sort of what I think we need to be thinking about. We call them our mantras in our work, the 4 mantras. And it's sort of along the banner of how we do the work is as important as what we do. Right? How we do the work is as important as what we do. I think these are critical to the civic path. This is what we teach people in communities, among other things. So number 1, I think we have to turn outward toward one another. And that sounds really nice. It's incredible right now. Turning outward is a mindset or a posture or an orientation It's not a technique. You can't download it off the internet. It's a fundamental choice we each have to make about what direction, what orientation we're going to have in relationship to one another and our communities. Most of us right now are turned inward. We've done millions of dollars of research with organizations. Most organizations, including higher education, are turned inward. We just got a president of AU and Emory University Med School because they're turned inward and they realize if they're going to deal with these international debates, they're going to have a different posture, right? So E-Town is different, I know. So here's the thing, the more stress you're under, we have tons of research on this, this is for individuals and organizations and societies. The more stress you're under, the more anxiety there is, the more fearful you are, the more trauma you've experienced, the more inward you turn. Just at the moment when we got to be turned outward toward each other, we need each other. We need each other. We need each other. And here's the other thing. We need to, again, this goes back to what Sam was saying, we need to engage one another. But it's very hard to do if we're turned inward. And it's incredibly hard to do if every debate we have is politicized, which I think goes on to the question you were asking before, which is politicized. So the question is, what do you do in a society where people are turned inward and everything's politicized? Here's what we found we need to do. We need to engage people around their shared aspirations. And when we do that, what they tell you is what matters to them, what matters to us in our daily lives. What matters to us in our daily lives. If you ask someone about their shared aspirations, they will tell you something from their gut that is actionable, doable, and achievable. And here's the thing. When we've done this across the country, whether it's in Jim Jordan's congressional district, or Matt Gaetz's district, or Flint, Michigan, where I've worked, or the Delta of Mississippi, we hear the same issues over and over again. Youth, healthcare, mental health. How did they unlock those debates? It's by reframing the public discussion from one of politics to one what matters to the community. Not utopian visions, not pie in the sky stuff, not bridging conversations where we're just trying to split our differences, but where we're creating something together about what we're for that we can act on. And here's the deal. When people talk about their shared aspirations, go home and try this tonight. They realize that amid our real differences, there are some things we actually do have in common, like youth, that we can work on together. When people talk about their shared aspirations, they actually realize that none of us can achieve these on our own. We need each other. Whether we like each other or not, we need each other, and we're going to have to find a way to work together. When people talk about their shared aspirations, it implicates each of us to become, we're not just consumers of public life, we are now members of a community. We are part of something larger than just ourselves, which, by the way, people are yearning for. People feel too isolated, too lonely, too on their own. So this is a remedy for that. It's a remedy for that. And what we find when we do this is that people feel a sense of possibility and hope. That's point number one. Point number two, we got to get in motion. We got to get in motion. I work with a lot of folks, Jesse and I talked about this on the phone the other day. I work with a lot of folks who believe that if we just talk enough, the world's going to be better. The world's going to be better. I think that's a march of folly. I think it's a march of folly. And I think it's a recipe for disaster. I think, yes, we need to have conversations. But I think equally so is we need to get in motion. Why? Because when we're in motion, we begin to see and discover that we have innate capabilities and gifts and resources we never dreamed we had before, and we can put them in motion. When we get in motion and don't get lost in planning, all of a sudden we discover, like they did in Reading, that we can take action on something, that we can take action and get moving. When we get in motion, all of a sudden we start to discover our sense of agency. Actually, we did something together. Let's keep going, and let's keep doing things. I think this came up earlier. Someone mentioned this. When we get in motion, we discover our shared humanity, right? When you were talking about the beloved community, it's rooted in a notion of shared humanity. We have lost our sense of shared humanity in America today. When we get in motion, we rediscover it. That's what the folks in Reading were telling us, that they're recreating together. The poorest community in America 10 years ago is leading the way, right down the road. It's really amazing. It's really amazing. So we've got to get in motion. When we get in motion, we discover friends and allies we once thought were enemies, which is actually also happening in Reading. And we also discover that people we once thought were allies actually are enemies. They're blowing smoke, frankly. They're talking a good game, but they're not going to show up and do anything. And we've got to find the folks who are ready to roll to get something done in our communities and in this country. So first one is turn outward. Second one is get in motion. Third one is counterintuitive. Start small to go big. Start small to go big. Now look, I want large systemic change because I believe we need it in our country. I won't go through all the issues. We all know them. But here's what I also know. As Americans, much more than any other place where I've done work, we are enamored with big comprehensive plans. You ever have them in your community? What happened to them? Not a damn thing, right? As one of the mayors in DeSoto County, Florida, where I'm working, said to me, I've got a whole shelf of those. And I said, what happened? She said, not a damn thing. Not a damn thing. They're gathering dust. We are enamored with the belief that only the big and the shiny and the most expensive things matter. We believe we got to get everyone around the table before we can take a step, which means we're not going anywhere, right? We get stalled. Things fizzle out. So a number of years ago, there's a book, I'm not trying to sell my book, but there is a book out there you can buy called Unleashed, which documents, we did a 30-year impact study of our work across the country. We picked 9 communities that were all different demographically, geographically, different challenges, different sizes. Everything from Las Vegas, of all places, to Red Hook, New York, which was about 1,100 people, and everything in between. They all created systemic change. We actually studied them the most when our part of the work ended and they took off on their own, which is where Reading is right now. Right? We were most interested. So that was 5 years after we worked with them, 10 years after we worked with them, 20 years after we worked with them. And here's what we discovered: a lot of things. There are about 9 or 10 principles. But here's one thing I just want to say that we discovered. Every change in those communities was catalyzed by a small action. By a small action. Some larger than others, but they were all catalyzed by a small action. And in catalyzing those small actions, they were intentional. We taught them a practice of being intentional in not only how do you catalyze a small action, but how do you unleash a chain reaction of actions that grows and spreads over time, that addresses what matters to people, and reshapes the civic culture of your community. This is what's going on in Reading right down the road. And that creates impact and grows what we would call civic faith, a belief in ourselves. In every instance, it started with a small action. In every instance. In so many communities I work with, they start with a big initiative. It's kind of like a demand curve in economics, right? I was a political economy major. I remember demand deep or down, right? The demand curve slopes down, right? They had a demand curve that was an initiative curve that sloped downward. Started with great fanfare, fizzled out. Why can't we create initiatives that start small and grow over time with greater momentum, increasing civic confidence and a greater belief in ourselves that we can actually create change together? In order to do that, what we've discovered is we got to start small. We got to start small, and it's a discipline. It also means we've got to give ourselves permission to do that. Because every signal we have sent to us in our local communities and in doing this work is that if you do not create large-scale change from the get-go, it is not valuable or worthy. And we've got to break that myth. We've got to break that myth. If we want to be strong abroad by being strong at home, we got to start small. We've got to start small. We've got to grow it, but we've got to start small. Last point. I believe we need to create a new trajectory of hope in our communities and in this country. Now, it's really interesting because the greatest predictor that I've found about whether or not a community moves forward is the health of its civic culture. I'm happy to talk about that when we have a conversation after this. But here's the greatest hidden factor of whether or not a community moves forward. It's the shared narrative of the community. The shared narrative of the community. In most communities that we work with, the narratives are negative. The narratives are negative. They're ingrained negative narratives, that we can't create change, that nothing is possible, that people won't step forward, that no one cares, that all our politicians are crooks, right? That everyone's out for themselves. And these narratives, interestingly enough, much like in your personal life, you know those personal tapes you have in your mind that kick in? Like, I'm not going to get supported by my boss. I'm not going to get the promotion, right? The person next to me really won't talk to me. They don't value. We all have these tapes. Well, communities do too. And these tapes shape a community's attitude. They shape our behaviors. Ultimately, they shape what we talk about to one another, and they shape our actions and behaviors. So if we want to move forward and be stronger in our communities and stronger at home, we need to create a new can-do narrative in this country. I think it's one of the big tasks we face in every community I'm working in. We've got to find a way to create new can-do narratives. Here's how to do it. Here's how to do it. One way, one ingredient. There are many ingredients, but here's one. The change that is getting created in local communities and in our country today, and there is good change taking place. There's a lot of good work in every community where we're working. It started way before we ever showed up. Way before we ever showed up. It's invisible. It's invisible. It's invisible to the people who are creating it. They're so busy grinding in the work that they can't see what they're creating. They have funders and sponsors who tell them, unless you hit all your metrics, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, unless you hit all your metrics, don't tell me what you're creating. Come to me at the end, right? Come to me at the end. But here's the deal. We know progress doesn't occur that way. It occurs in increments and over time. We take 2 steps backward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? So what we found in doing this work is that too much of it's invisible to the people creating it. It's also invisible to the larger community. So people are believing we're not making any progress at all when progress actually is being made. I'm not talking about sugarcoating progress. I'm not talking about hyping it, which is what we typically do. I'm not talking about some Chamber of Commerce initiative, right, where we hang signs from the streetlights telling, oh, this town is wonderful, when we know it's got a huge poverty rate. People are falling behind and being left out. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about authentic stories of change, what we call civic parables. We have to learn how to tell stories of change in ways, much like parables. You all know the Good Samaritan story? Much like reflect the good, the bad, and the ugly, where people can see themselves in the story and are implicated by it. You could be in this story. You could be a civic actor. You can be part of this. Maybe not in the way you're reading in the story, but in some other way. And we need to lift up these stories and ostensibly restory communities, reseed communities with these stories. So we found that people didn't know how to do this. So we actually created a tool called Making the Invisible Visible. You can download it from our website for free. You can start using it tomorrow, or if you want, tonight. And what they do is they help people see the progress that they're making, the obstacles that they face, the work that still needs to be done, and to lift up these stories in a way that's real and that they can start to tell them to other people in ways that are understandable, that both inspire them and also give them confidence that we're dealing with reality. We need a new trajectory of hope. Hope is created in part. I believe hope is a strategy. You've heard the saying, hope is not a strategy. I think hope is a strategy, so long as it's concrete and real. These stories help make it real. Hope does become a strategy. Okay, let me just end with this. I'm not going to usually end. I'm just going to cut to the chase because I want to end. Is that all right? Yeah. All right. You want me to end quickly? Oh, okay. People often say, well, Rich, this all sounds nice. It's great. You're working in Reading or Selma, wherever the heck it is. But we got a big country. And our country needs to change. And I don't have a belief that we can make that happen. And what I say is, well, I think what we ought to do is look at the history of this country. Now, I happen to love this country. And I say, a lot of the places where I say that, people cringe, particularly my friends on the left. They cringe. But I actually do love this country. And I love it deeply. And I love it so deeply but I'm not afraid to say that it was founded on original sins. We enslaved people in this country in order to found it. We removed indigenous folks from their land and sought to destroy their culture. I think we've got to get real about that. And I think we have to be honest about it. And I think we have to reconcile about it with folks we harmed, right? We have some work to do. But the reason why I love this country at the same time is because, unlike so many other countries, we refuse to give up. We keep striving to move forward. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. People in this country keep coming together to try to move us forward, to make a more perfect union. We've done it time and time again in this country. We did it at the founding, and it always started in our local communities. It always started not in Washington, D.C. or some state capital. Think about it, the American Revolution. It didn't start in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, the 13 colonies barely agreed on anything. Right? And most Americans at that time didn't agree on a revolution either, as you know. As folks who live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. What we did agree on was a common purpose to kick King George the hell out of our country, out of our land. And so people came off of farms and small towns and hamlets. They didn't have an internet to coordinate people. They didn't have Gantt charts. They didn't even have common uniforms. But somehow or another, there was a common purpose that got formed, a shared purpose. And we worked together and formed a country, not based on a monarchy, not based on religion, not based on race or ethnicity, not based on money, but based on an idea. Based on an idea. When we faced the scourge of slavery in this country, it was not abolished in Washington, D.C. or in state capitals. As you know, there was huge division. The abolition of slavery began in local communities by people meeting in church basements, around kitchen tables, across fences, in their local communities, right? People coming together and saying we need a new path forward. When we needed women's suffrage, it didn't start in Washington, D.C. or Albany, New York. I'm from upstate New York, even though Seneca Falls is in New York. It started in Seneca Falls and in lots of local communities. And people came together and made it happen. And we finally got Washington, D.C. and other places to act. Voting rights that I was just speaking about in Selma, and civil rights and gay rights all started in our local communities with us. Not with our politicians, not with our presidents, not with our governors, with us. I think in America today, we need a similar type of change. Not just about electing a new president in November, as important as that is, and I hope you do vote. But let's get real. A new president's not going to solve a lot of the problems that we face. It's not going to solve loneliness. It's not going to solve people's lack of agency. It's not going to solve the fact that we don't afford each other dignity in this country. Many people dignity. It's not going to change the fact that a lot of people don't feel seen and heard. It's not going to change the fact that a lot of folks feel left out and left behind. It's not going to change the fact that we need adults to read to kids to make sure that they can succeed in life. It's not going to change the fact that we need adults to provide unconditional love to our youth in our communities. That can't come from D.C. or Harrisburg. That's going to come from us. That's going to come from us. So I believe the work that we need to do, the change that's going to get created in this country, the new trajectory that we need to set forth, it's all got to come from our local communities. And then we'll get our politicians to join us when they realize that the country's moving in a direction and no politician likes to be left behind. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much. We do have time for some questions if anybody would like to ask our keynote anything.
You can disagree too.
I agree with everything you said. I understand your idea of starting small and growing big, and you obviously are a very busy man with a different city every day. What's your next big step?
Our next big step?
Yeah, what are your plans? How do you take this national? How do you take this bigger than what it is now?
Yeah, so we are national. We have a network of about 40,000 people. As I said, we've got folks in 40 countries doing work. we are doing the work in Reading. That's a part of our strategy right now, which is to go deep, at 6 or 7 communities that each reflect a different set of challenges in the country and collectively represent the mosaic, because we want to demonstrate that we as Americans can come together and get things done. But before we did that, our work was spread. We had a strategy to spread our work all across the United States, which we've done. So we're continuing to do that. We're doing this campaign during the presidential race and we're getting a lot of attention because we want to lift up an alternative message about how we can move forward as Americans. We have a school that we're scaling because we want to make sure that anyone, anywhere can gain access to our approach and make it their own. And so we're working on all these things moving forward, and we're running as fast as we possibly can. I'm as dead tired as I possibly can be. So,
I commend you for all that work and for all the things that you're doing. My concern is, it sounds like at times you're meeting in small groups like this, and they're important groups. But how do you get to talk to the masses? Yeah, so the way we're doing that is through different types of work. So while we're doing this, or I'm speaking to even if a group of 1,000 people sometimes, we're on media, right, all the time. I'm writing all the time. We're publishing all the time. I was just on PBS on the NewsHour in a special segment that Judy Woodruff did on us. So we're amplifying our message that way, which is really critical. Similarly, this is a strategy we started 10 or 15 years ago, which we're still doing, is we form relationships with nationally networked organizations like United Way Worldwide, Public Broadcasting, American Library Association, AARP, and they essentially become distribution mechanisms for our approach as a way to spread it nationally. So we have transformed thousands of public libraries across America using our approach. Actually, we haven't. The people using our approach have transformed their public libraries to become hubs for their communities. So we now have, so they can now use this work locally, we now have a network that we can tap into and begin to help activate across the country, which we do every day. So, yeah. But if you have advice or help, I'd love to get it. AARP, but you saw my gray hair.
I wanted to get a free membership. That's why I did it. Yes, sir.
I have a question for you on trying to get rid of 3 of the I's words we have and I's word to use. Politicize, polarize, demonize.
Yeah.
And if we could get rid of those and go to compromise, then we'd be better off.
Yeah.
And how do we do that?
By starting with those 4 things I said at the end. So our campaign is called Enough Time to Build. And the reason why the word build is here is because I think we Americans, part of the American DNA is to build, right? And we like to create things. We're highly pragmatic. We tend to be highly pragmatic. And when we're building, we're creating something. And I think the politicized, polarized, demonized are things that we do when we're in the status quo. So the question becomes, how do you break out of that? Which is how I interpret your question in my work. It's like, how do we break out of that? Well, we break out of that by reframing the public discussion around what matters to people, because then people will want to work on it together. That's what's happening in a lot of these places where we're working. We have to do something together, because doing something actually enables us to lessen the demonization of one another, because you start to realize your shared humanity and shared gifts and talents, and that we need each other, right?
So we have to see why the other person thinks that way. You have to put yourself in their position and try to understand what they're doing.
We do, but here's the caution I would offer, just through my own experience. This is a caution. In a lot of communities, they have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to understand their past. And what happens is they're stuck in it. They're stuck in it. So I actually believe it's really important to understand our past, as I mentioned earlier. And I think we've got to reconcile with our past. But what I've found is the fastest pathway to doing that is to start with what is it that we want to create together, which helps us see our shared humanity. And then it's much easier to build the confidence and the trust and the spaces to start to deal with these underlying issues that I think are so essential to deal with. You can't work in Mississippi if you're not going to deal with race. It's not possible. But if you start with race, you're not going to do any work either. And I've done a lot of work in Mississippi, and I've been stalled. So I think there are different ways that we need to approach this in order to get movement and understanding. And what I've found, I'd love for you to be part of some of the work we're doing, because what I've found, like in Reading, let's just go back to Reading. You know, everyone thinks Reading is homogeneous because it's 70% Latino. Well, as you know, folks are from 7 different countries. They have different dialects, different heritage, different customs. Very, you know, a Mexican and a Puerto Rican and a Dominican are all very different, very different cultures. They've been highly fragmented in Reading. One of our partners is the Hispanic Center. Our main partner is the Hispanic Center, Centro Hispano. The way in which we're bridging those divides in Reading is to get people creating things together so that then they can figure out how to work together, live together, and work through some of these historical issues as well. So, but I agree with you. Those three, what do you call them?
Eyes.
Eyes are really critical.
I think it wouldn't be surprising to hear that some people might say, surely at times you have been beaten down, your spirit has really suffered. So I have a question. How would you characterize your personality?
My personality?
Yeah. How do you deal?
Let me put two of these together so I get on the couch. I can tell you a really quick story, which is probably the most important thing to know about me in relationship to your question. When I was a child, I cut this out of my talk because I felt like I was running too long. When I was born, I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. In 1960, that was a death sentence. My family went on a death watch. I had 3 to 5 years to live. I learned very early on what it feels like to not be seen and heard. I learned really early on what it feels to be manhandled and repeatedly violated physically for tests and to lose your dignity. I learned really early on, I experienced all these doctors and nurses surrounding my hospital bed, which I was in for most of my youth and some of my adulthood, all talking about me but never talking to me. I went through numerous triage rooms and ERs where they asked me questions that were wholly irrelevant to how I felt, and most importantly, what I was experiencing and the terror that I was experiencing as a young child. I saw my parents not be able to afford to get me into a hospital, so we waited till 12:01 in the parking lot so we didn't have to pay that extra day. And I saw them borrow money from all our relatives to make ends meet. Now, by the grace of God, my diagnosis changed over the years. It took a long time. And by the grace of God, I had 3 men who did not know each other from different walks of life in my community come save me and lift me up and teach me things that, but for them I would never have known. One taught me how to build things with my hands in his wood shop in his backyard when I was 12 years old. One taught me how to climb a ladder to fix things in the ceiling. I thought he was trying to make me an electrician, but really, in a way, he was trying to teach me that I could keep rising up. I had another who was a baseball and basketball coach who taught me that despite my I could exert myself physically and be a really good athlete. So I was recruited to play in college and have hope. He was the person who taught me I could have hope. It was safe to have hope. So what keeps me going is that I don't believe anyone in America should experience things like this. What keeps me going is that there are too many inequities and disparities in this country. What keeps me going is that too many people have lost hope. What keeps me going is that too many people feel abandoned in this country. What keeps me going is that people are judged by the color of their skin, or the hat they're wearing, or the car they drive, or the clothes they wear, or the fact that maybe they don't have the wherewithal to take a shower, a place to take a shower. And yet they're still human beings with value. So I get tired. I'm really tired right now. I've been on the road for weeks and weeks and weeks. I have 24 hours at home, and then I'm on a plane at 6 a.m. Monday morning for another swing through California. Whether or not I get on that plane, I'm not sure yet because I'm so tired. But I just want to keep going because I believe as a country we can do better. And we've got to activate ourselves to make that happen. So I hope that helps.
Let's take one more question.
I was wondering if in your conversations with different communities around the country, climate change comes up, because climate change does not always affect all communities equally. There is the issue of environmental injustice.
Yes. It just came up the other day in Philly. But it's interesting. So my wife is a very senior person at the Environmental Protection Agency, so we have this conversation all the time. And it's a debate at times. I hear climate change come up a lot of times from young people who obviously are concerned about their futures and the future of the country. I hear it come up a lot from people from a political angle, right? From a political organizing angle. In a lot of the communities where we're working, I hear it come up because they're being flooded, because they don't have the infrastructure to deal with things, because their shorelines are being eroded. In a place like Arizona or New Mexico, because of the heat that's taking place. Or I'm about to go, this California swing I'm going is to Butte County, where the Paradise Campfire, and we work with folks after that, right? So what I hear people talking about is how they're experiencing changes in our climate in their lives. And I think we would probably be wise to listen more to that and to frame this issue more in those terms, because I think we probably see more people come together and take action than take political positions. And right now, this debate is captured by political positions. And I don't think it's healthy for where we need to go. So, is that?
Yes.
Does that help? And actually, I should just say one other quick thing. Our biggest partner in Ohio is Honda. The company Honda is funding us because they want thriving communities, and they have plans that they're transitioning really rapidly to EV. So all their employees there are really much like coal country folks would be. Their employees are concerned about what's going to happen, as any of us would be. So I think what becomes really important is for a company like Honda to make sure that they're actually facing up to those issues with their employees in a way that helps people move their lives forward, and not just, I'm not saying they're abandoning them, but we have a history in this country of abandoning people as we make transitions. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we want to act on some of these larger issues, we've got to get a heck of a lot better about not abandoning people. And I think that's really important. So.
Well, Rich, thank you so much. We at the World Affairs Council are so grateful for your energy and your passion that you brought to us. Just a little token of our appreciation. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much.
I guess it's my turn.
And now, once again, our President, Joyce Metcalf.
Thank you. In fact, I'm going to invite you when you have time to join me on Battleground PA to talk, okay? 10 Live Battleground PA. Because these ideas, you're right, need to be shared widely. They really do. So thank you. And now we're at that part of our program where we want to really celebrate and lift up those people who are doing the right thing in our communities, right? Before I do that, though, there's at least 2 people. I'm hoping I'm not in our group, because in fact, our board of directors, when you're here, please stand up and accept my thank you to you and our community for making it. Our board of directors, thank you all. But there are 2 members who have joined at the highest level, who support us, our ambassador level members. And they did not get their ambassador level because they joined the board of directors after we give out things in May with our torture war. So I want to let them personally know right now, we have your little token of our esteem for your being ambassador level members. Frank Rapisarda and Dr. Najiba Please come forward. And you know how much your support at this level means to us. It makes this possible, but it makes even more than this possible. It makes people like Sam possible, right? Because that's the next generation, and you are feeding into that. So I think they want a picture. Thank you, thank you. And we have several of our board members who are ambassador level, but we honor them at our torture award, so I wanted to make sure that Dr. Najiba and Frank got theirs as well. All right, so at this point, we do want to call up members of our board who are going to do the honors and make the presentation to what we are labeling peacemakers in our midst. So we take the time, we look around, we hear from people. Who are those people who are doing their best, their utmost, to calm the troubled waters in our communities, to enlighten, to bring truth and to people that may not fully understand what the issues are. And I think we have selected some very good nominees, but I'm not going to do the introduction. We're going to first ask Dr. Aurelia Garcia Dominique, a member of our board, an ambassador level member, to come forward to really tell us about our first organization. We've honored 3 organizations and 2 people. So the first organization, Dr. Aurelia will tell us.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. I appreciate this. And good afternoon. I have the honor to introduce to you the Peace Promise. The Peace Promise is dedicated to addressing the complexities of sex trafficking in the region here in Harrisburg. Through outreach, intervention, and advocacy, they support individuals impacted by sex exploitation. Their mission extends to providing healing and restorative care for survivors, as well as educating the community about the realities and the identifiers of trafficking. Peace Promise continues to make a profound impact by raising awareness and offering hope to those that have been afflicted by exploitation. Their innovative efforts, including projects like Good Ground Coffee, take a deep breath, smell coffee, including projects like Good Ground Coffee Company. They provide employment opportunities for survivors, empowering them how to begin again, empowering them to rebuild their lives. Congratulations again to Peace Promise. So our center star?
Yeah, that's right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a tremendous honor to be here today and to be awarded with the peacemakers in our midst. As I was coming over here today, I was thinking about definitions of peace and what it looks like. And one definition I really enjoy and appreciate is wholeness. It's not necessarily that it's in the absence of conflict or in the absence of injustice. It's in the very midst, like this award indicates, that we are offering. What does it look like to offer wholeness? What does it look like to offer flourishing? And Good Ground Coffee Company is one of those things that we've started. It just started in April. 6 survivors are employed there. This gives them an opportunity for economic empowerment to earn a wage in a trauma-informed and safe and welcoming environment as they work through and navigate healing from complex trauma. And then also it is a wraparound program where they learn life skills and social support with one another and learning how. But I really appreciated your comments because it starts small. This started in 2008 with 8 women who saw a documentary on Dateline about human trafficking, and they were horrified
we're moms of preschoolers, infants. What could we possibly do? And they just kept meeting, and they kept meeting. And it was an all-volunteer organization until 2018, hired a first staff member. And then the coffee shop in 2022, or 2024, the ladies came on board in 22 to begin working to create it. So talk about being tired. These women are exhausted.
We've got good coffee.
Thank you. But anyway, thank you so much, and I really appreciate the honor today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I will ask our ambassador level board member, Francis Robisarda, to come forward for the second honoree.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. It's an honor for me to be here today and take in all of this great food for the soul that we all got to have today. And I appreciate it very much. Love Inc. Love in the name of Christ. I love that name. Love Inc. of Lancaster County is a powerful network of over 100 local churches united in a mission to transform lives and communities in the name of Christ. For over 30 years, their impactful ministries, including Homes of Hope, Flowing Oil Cafe, and Compassion Projects, have served those in need across Lancaster County. Through the Hope and Wholeness Center, they provide support to individuals in crisis, connecting them with resources and the love of Christ. The dedication to empowering churches and offering practical assistance makes them a true force for peace, transformation, and community. Yes, it's important to offer an assistant hand to help people up when they're in need, but it's also important to reach out with the other hand to give them tools to be more sustainable, substance, and maintaining their skills of self-sufficiency. The proverb we all know, I'm sure, is feed a man a fish, and he eats for a day, but teach a man how to fish, and he eats forever. And for that, we'd like to honor Love Inc. of Lancaster County.
Okay, we'll get this award to them. I thought we had a representative who would come in a little bit earlier, but we will make sure they get it. Thank you. And we ask Ms. Lindsay Bowman to come forward for our next honoree.
Good afternoon. Rotary International District 7390 has been a driving force for peace, achieving recognition as a peace-building district in 2023-2024. Through partnership with the Institute for Economics and Peace, District 7390 promotes positive peace, addressing the root causes of conflict and fostering long-term peace by building community-based solutions. A key initiative has been the installation of peace poles, monuments that display the message, "May peace prevail on earth," in multiple languages. These poles are planted in public spaces, symbolizing a commitment to peace and encouraging communities to reflect on unity and cooperation. District 7390 continues to uphold Rotary's motto, "Service above self," by actively engaging in peace-building efforts and inspiring others to act toward creating a more peaceful world. Please join me in congratulating Rotary International District 7390. So this is the first one.
Thank you. I'm honored to receive this on behalf of District 7390 Rotary. Rotary is an international organization with clubs all throughout the world. And our district leaders are in Toronto today at another conference. And they asked me to participate as a lifelong pacifist. And with the daughter serving her second tour in the Peace Corps, I'm thrilled that Rotary got this award, so thank you very much.
And our final, but most important, I will say, individual award is actually going to a couple. And for that, I'm going to ask my better half, Reverend Russell Goodman, to come and do the honors.
Thank you, honorable wife.
Obedient wife.
You know, I was struck by your phrase, the shared aspirations. And I think that's what we have here today. All of us are advocates for, promoters of peace, I would hope. And that's the shared aspiration that we have, that all of us have, with our next honorees, the Reverend Warren and Mrs. Teresa Eschbach, who clearly are living out what it was that the original social justice warrior was all about when he said that I was hungry and you fed me. And I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. And I was sick and you healed me. And I was naked and you clothed me. And I was a stranger. You took me in. Yeah. And I was in prison. You came to visit. Reverend Warren and Mrs. Teresa Eschbach have dedicated their lives to championing diversity and social justice. They're residents of Messiah Lifewise Retirement Community, and there they have inspired many people through their courageous and compassionate work. 4 years ago in 2020, shortly after moving in, they began facilitating a class on faith and racial healing, encouraging participants, many of them over age 65, to reflect on their faith community's role in addressing racism. If you're from central Pennsylvania, you know that took some courage, because many of us are about going to church on Sunday morning and it's happy clappy time and we don't say nothing about anti-racism or actually loving our neighbor as ourselves. Amen? 2023, they launched another impactful class, Reconciling in an Era of Polarity and Chaos, teaching their neighbors how to bridge differences and engage in meaningful dialogue. I'm happy to say that their work continues to bring unity and positive change today. So will you join me in welcoming the Reverend Warren and Mrs. Teresa Eschbach?
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. Please.
I am honored and deeply humbled to receive this award, and I thank you for this gift that I find myself thinking, honestly, why me? When there have been so many who have done important things.
Church of the Brethren on the principle of educate for service, where one of the mottos of the original founders was to bring the world of the Spirit into the world of work. And so it's an honor for me to receive it here, and I'm happy to serve with Joyce on that board. I'm also honored because I'm receiving it out of the context of the place where we live, Messiah Lifeways Community, a continuing care retirement community of the Brethren in Christ Church in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. It was there that Chaplain E.B. Telford invited us to help facilitate that course in faith and racial healing. And then it was their Pathways Institute for Lifelong Learning that got me involved in teaching reconciliation in an era of polarity and chaos. The formation of my commitment to peacemaking came from the teaching of Christian faith from the Anabaptist pietist tradition of the Church of the Brethren. But that isn't the only place I learned about peace. I learned about peace in 1967, when the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King happened, and Baltimore burned while we served a church in nearby Linthicum community. And I will never forget the night that for the first time, African Americans and white Americans worshiped together in our church amidst threats and violence, or near violence. But I will always remember the way it began. We had to have the protection of the Anne Arundel County Police Department to even have blacks come into our community. There was so much fear and anxiety about that. And yet, when the processional hymn was played, it was, "Beneath the cross of Jesus I fain would take my stand. The shadow of a mighty rock within a weary land." I'll never forget that time. That was another one of the times when I believed very firmly that the way of peace was not the way of happiness always. It was not the way of lack of conflict. It was the way of resolve to move forward for the good of others and yourself. It was through the writings of Desmond Tutu that I learned about an African way of living called Ubuntu, which means my humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. I am because who you are. We're a symphony, and a great symphony plays harmony together. And Rich, you reminded me that we, as Americans, are a great symphony, but we need to harmonize, and we can only harmonize when we play into each other. So, a sign that hangs on the wall of a civil rights attorney says it well. There can be no healing without justice, and justice requires courage. This award is a challenge for me in these times to be courageous in listening and learning from others who are different, but who share the same humanity. In such listening, we may find the courage to continue to be effective peacemakers. Thank you for this award and for your confidence in us as peacemakers. And thank you to those who nominated us for this position.
Well, I am just almost moved to tears by we have honored people who truly deserve to be recognized because they will be inspirations for us all, right? And I would be remiss if Michelle has reminded me, we will post it on our website, so check our website. But we have received a special letter from Governor Shapiro acknowledging the importance of us doing this kind of thing, recognizing those people who are bringing us together, right? And I have to tell you, even though we had a lot, I'm a Christian, I'm proud of it, we have a lot of Christians in here, but we have had winners and do lift up people from all different religions who are working at peace. That God there who won is a Baha'i, And he actually is a leader in peace. He does all kinds of events that pull us all together. Saeed Onal, who was supposed to be here, but his back is raised, one of our board members. He's a member of the Turkish cultural community, and they have a big outreach for peace. So we really do span, and we bring together all of the like-minded people who are trying to work together. So again, I want to thank you to our closing keynote. He has definitely given us a lot to ponder. I just wonder, and I just ask us all, let's figure out what we can do. Each one of us, everybody's brain has to be on this. How can we come together to start small with little old E-Town or Harrisburg, right, and make it something that will spread around the world, okay? So with that, I bow and thank each one of you for being here, taking time out of your Saturday, and I urge you, if you're not a member, join us. If you're interested in getting more involved, let us know. And please subscribe to our Next Gen PA podcast, so to support those young people. They are the next generation of world leaders. So thank you all. Enjoy. Have a good day.